Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto reincarnation of Ulquiorra and Bleach. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by the Emerald Blight and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Uzumaki Naruto, for crimes against Konoha no Sato and the attempted murder of the Uchiha clan head, Uchiha Sasuke. You are sentenced to death. Your execution is to be carried out in 3 days' time. Do you have anything to say? The bloody and bruised 13-year-old boy with matted yellow hair and cerulean eyes looked up lifelessly at the speaker, his face blank and emotionless in face of his situation. I completed my mission to the letter. I kept my promise. I did everything to bring Sasuke back and succeeded. And this is my reward. You're going to kill me? The blonde turned his head, the sound of chains rattling from the action as his body shifted the heavy shackles binding his hands and feet to the podium on which he stood. All of you. This is all I am to you. A traitor. A monster. The surrounding shinobi didn't answer, but Naruto could see the conviction in their eyes. All of them, Kakashi-sensei, Sakura, Shikamaru, Choji, Ino, Asuma, Kiba, Shino, Kurenai, even Team 10, aka Team Youth, were looking at him with the same contempt, disappointment and relief. They were all in support of this, it was apparent. And you? Naruto turned his head back to the one who had sentenced him. Oji-san would be twisting in his grave if he saw you now, Bachan. Is this the will of fire you have inherited? Do you execute loyal shinobi because they completed a mission that went beyond your predictions? The blonde-haired woman shook her head sadly and looked down to Naruto. This matter has been decided, Uzumaki Naruto. Eyewitness accounts confirm that the Uchiha surrendered before you attacked. Tsunade looked away from him and nodded to a masked ambu guard, gesturing for the shinobi to take Naruto away. Your chakra will be sealed and you will be kept in a maximum security cell until your execution. I pray you find some measure of penitence in the time given to you. Betrayer they called me. I am disappointed, Naruto. I thought I taught you better than this. Naruto narrowed his eyes and looked through the bars to his cell, restraining the urge to pointedly glare at the silver-haired jounin standing there. Come to gloat, have you, sensei? You always did like to show how pathetic I was. Kakashi shook his head. Gloat. Now, there is nothing to gloat about here. What you have done is too serious to disregard with gloating and humor. Do you understand what you almost did? The silver-haired man leaned against the bars and lowered the green-covered book he had been reading. You tried to kill your teammate. Not only that, but you used ninjutsu designed only to be used on enemies on a fellow Konoha shinobi. I thought you better than that. And never mind the fact that Sasuke not only stabbed me with his chidori, a jutsu you taught him mind you, but tried to do so multiple times as well as set me on fire. Naruto retorted. Kakashi shrugged. Sasuke knew you were in no danger. He was defending himself. Naruto growled under his breath. Well then, say what you came here to say and be done with it. Kakashi nodded. Very well. The council has allowed Sasuke the right to execute you. As he was the one who you tried to kill, it is only fitting he be allowed to personally mete out justice. Traitor. Naruto rubbed his eyes tiredly and shifted on the floor of his cell. How long had he been waiting? 2 days? 3? When would they put an end to him? Fukuku, now isn't this fitting, dope? Naruto's eyes narrowed and he sprung to his feet. Sasuke. The source of Naruto's anger, a bandaged but still smirking Uchiha Sasuke, let out another laugh as he wrapped his knuckles along the bars that separated them. Finally, Konoha finds a place for you. Don't you find it interesting that you are the one behind these bars and to be put to death while I am out here, free as a bird and praised as a hero? Naruto ground his teeth together and advanced on the Uchiha, stopping only when the chains connecting him to the wall pulled him to the floor. Fukuku, still a slow learner then. Let me explain. Sasuke's eyes shifted and Naruto watched as a fully mature Sharingan lit up the otherwise dark room. I am the last loyal Uchiha. My eyes promise the continued authority for Konoha over the rest of the world. When you dragged me back here, the council came to me with an interesting proposal. I helped them kill you and remain loyal to Konoha, and they will give me all the power I could ask for. Which they already have started to do, mind you. Sasuke pointed out. I have been inducted into a program made just for me that puts me on the fast track to become an Anbu officer, and when I kill you, I will be granted the Mangekyo Sharingan and become even more powerful than you. Naruto shook his head. Idiot. You will never be stronger than me. Sasuke flared his chakra and blasted a massive amount of killer intent at Naruto, which, because the blonde was currently sealed, caused him to start to hyperventilate. What was that, dope? Naruto coughed and turned around, walking back over to the wall and sliding down it to sit down on the floor once more. You will never be stronger than me, Sasuke. Do you know why? Sasuke said nothing, waiting for Naruto's answer. Naruto allowed a small smile to flicker across his face. You lack hatred. In truth, it was I who was betrayed. Who is it this time? I'm getting tired of these visits. I'm starting to feel like I'm on display in a zoo rather than on death row. Naruto called. The blonde raised his head to his latest visitor and blinked when he saw the unmistakable figure of Hyuga Hinata standing there. "You as well, Hinata-chan. What words of hatred have you for me? I've already had Kakashi and Sasuke express themselves. Even Sakura had a few choice phrases." Hinata's body flinched and a hiccup shot out of her, causing Naruto to frown in confusion. "Then Naruto-kun, forgive me." Naruto's eyes widened at this phrase. He hadn't heard that from any of the people he had once counted as friends. And honestly had never thought to hear it from a Hyuga of all people. "Pardon? Forgive me, Naruto-kun." Hinata looked up and Naruto flinched back when he saw that her cheeks were stained with tears. I should have been stronger. I should have fought for you. And now you're going to die." Naruto let out a long breath and forced a smile on his face, trying to comfort the only person who seemed to be saddened even the slightest at his coming demise. "Hey, don't look so down, Hinata-chan. It's not that bad really." "How?" Hinata almost screamed, fresh tears pouring. "They're going to have you executed because you had to hurt that asshole Uchiha to bring him back. How could it possibly get worse?" Now Naruto was completely shocked. He had never expected to hear Hinata say things like that, let alone in a loud voice. It was almost funny to hear her swear. "Well." Naruto scratched the back of his head, trying to think of a way it could have been worse. They could have made the punishment torture until death. He briefly thought drearily. They could have made the execution to be carried out by the villagers. That would have been a really bad way to die, since those ones usually involve stoning. "At least this way I get to go out as a shinobi and rather quickly, I guess." Hinata shook her head. "It's not fair. Uchiha Sasuke should be getting this punishment, not you." Tsunade was furious when the council put forward this. Naruto blinked. "Hang on, Bachan was angry. She was the one who sentenced me." Hinata blinked owlishly. "That's not right. Tsunade-sama wanted you rewarded and promoted for bringing the Uchiha back alive, despite his injuries." Naruto frowned. Well, she sure seemed professional about the decision. Hinata frowned as if trying to piece together what had happened to Tsunade and her loyalty to Naruto when the blonde spoke up and brought her out of her musings. "Say, Hinata-chan. Not to look a gift horse in the mouth, I mean it means a lot to me to know that I haven't been completely abandoned, but why are you even here? Fair enough, you are upset that Konoha is going to have me killed and all, but this is a really depressing place to be. You didn't have to come here." Hinata shook her head and gripped the bars as if she was afraid that the entire room would suddenly disappear, Naruto included. "I had to, Naruto-kun. I had to see you one last time at least." "But why?" "Because." Hinata looked down sadly, more tears flowing. "Because, I love you, Naruto-kun. I always have. And I wanted you to know that. To know that even if everyone else has abandoned you, I'm always by your side." "I was abandoned by all bar one. We are gathered here to bear witness to the execution of former Konoha shinobi and S-class traitor, Uzumaki Naruto, for the crimes of high treason and the attempted assassination of a clan leader," Tsunade declared, standing before the large gathering of people who had come to witness the event. Naruto was standing in the middle of the main square of Konoha, his arms and legs spread out wide by steel chains connecting his wrists and ankles to two large wooden posts on either side of him. With the addition of several chakra-draining seals applied to him, he was completely immobile and defenseless. Uzumaki Naruto has been tried and found guilty of these crimes, and as such, with a betrayal of such magnitude, his punishment is execution. As a shinobi, he is granted only a single honor, and that is a shinobi's death at the hands of another shinobi. Tsunade continued. "Will the appointed step forward?" At this, Naruto watched as Sasuke stepped down from his place behind Tsunade's right and walked over and into position in front of Naruto 50 yards away. It almost made Naruto sick to hear the joyous cheers the other shinobi and villagers gave the Uchiha when they realized he would be the one to rid the world of the hated demon. Does the traitor have any last words? Naruto clicked his tongue in thought before shaking his head. Tsunade let out a deep breath before looking to Sasuke and nodding. Sasuke grinned and flashed his hands together before holding his right hand out, his left holding it to support the chakra growing on his hand. Chidori. Naruto didn't even pay attention to the Uchiha as he advanced on him, the blade of lightning flashing brightly. Instead, he looked to the back of the crowd, finding the one pair of tear-filled eyes that belonged only to Hinata, and smiled. Then Sasuke struck. Naruto bit back a scream as he felt Sasuke's entire arm stabbed through the middle of his chest, right below his collarbone. It was fatal and hurt like a bitch, not what he expected at all. "Looks like you're done, dope." Sasuke sneered quietly as he twisted his wrist, causing more pain to flood the slowly dying body of Naruto. "You go out of this world as you came into it. Alone and hated." Naruto's chest shook as he coughed out a pained laugh. "Hey, Sasuke." The Uchiha blinked and looked to Naruto, surprised the blonde still possessed the strength to speak. "What?" Naruto flashed a grin at the Uchiha, one that held all the hatred and animosity he had felt about the whole ordeal, and shook his head. "I expected more, but that Uzumaki Naruto died. And with him, he stole the one thing Sasuke wanted more than the Mangekyo Sharingan. The victory." Naruto awoke and sat up easily, sighing. It is not like me to behave so nostalgic. I cannot remember the last time I thought back to my previous life. It had been several years since that day. From the moment of his death at the hands of Sasuke and Konoha, Naruto learned that there was more to life and death than simply a beginning and an end. In fact, if one were to consider it, it would have been reasonable to state that life was simply a prelude, a mere footnote for the true existence that was to come. Whether it had been the method of his death or the complete betrayal by all he had held dear, Naruto was unsure, but upon his death his soul had exploded into a shower of despair and light. It was a very curious experience, to be spread out over such wide range as nothing more than mere consciousness. But it only lasted as brief few seconds. When he reassembled himself he was changed. His outwards appearance now revealing the emptiness he felt within. His new body stood at 5'10", and despite having a lanky frame, he appeared to have perfect muscle definition. Legs and waist were covered in thick black fur, as well as his arms right up to just past his elbows, and his fingers ended in razor-sharp talons. From his back 2 large leathery bat-like wings stretched and a long thin whip-like tail came out from his back. In the center of his chest, right where Sasuke had killed him, just below his collarbone, was a large hole that ran right through him with a black, blood-like liquid dripping down his chest from it. His face was covered by a bone-white mask, appearing like a battle helmet with 2 horns coming out from the sides. The only part of his face that was visible were his eyes, no longer a bright and euphoric blue, but a cold, almost pitiless green with black slits. Upon his transformation and taking in his new, more bestial appearance, Naruto had spoken. It seems that Uzumaki Naruto is well and truly dead after all. I am not Uzumaki Naruto. My name is Ulquiorra Schiffer. Since that day Ulquiorra had learned quite a bit about who and what he now was. It appeared, from what others like him had told him, that he was a hollow. And more than that, he was what the hollows referred to as a Minos Grand. Apparently Minos Grand were hollows with unimaginable power. Ulquiorra managed to leave behind the world of the living and enter the world of the hollows, a place called Hueco Mundo. It was there that he was currently waking after dreams of the past. Ulquiorra stood up and was about to find a hapless hollow to devour to get him through the day when he felt an unbelievably strong Ryutsu standing behind him. Can I help you with something? Ulquiorra turned around and blinked in surprise when he saw that the source of the massive Ryutsu was actually a Shinigami. Shinigami? Aren't you a bit far from home? The Shinigami smiled as if he found the statement amusing. One could presume as much, was his answer. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Aizen Sasuke. I have a proposition for you. But first, may I know your name? Ulquiorra Schiffer. The former ninja answered. Vast, O Lord. Perfect. I have been looking for someone like you, Ulquiorra-san. Ulquiorra frowned underneath his mask. Explain. I am in the need of Minos Grand, willing to follow me without question. In return I can promise power. Aizen proposed. I am going to take the seat of heaven. Ulquiorra shrugged. I have no use for power. With all the power I already possess I have no use for it. No Vasto Lord has any use for their power. It is a mundane existence. We sit here and simply continue to exist. Nothing more. Aizen nodded. I see. Would you prefer purpose as well then? Ulquiorra didn't say anything, simply looking at Aizen quietly. I said I was seeking Minos Grand to serve me in my quest to take the seat of heaven, with that comes the purpose to follow me, Ulquiorra-san. Aizen continued. Follow me and I can give you power and a reason to use it. Ulquiorra said nothing as he considered the proposal. Finally, after what seemed like an age itself, the Vasto Lord stepped forward and bent down to one knee. I will follow you, Aizen-sama. Several years later, Ulquiorra had followed Aizen loyally just as he had vowed. The Shinigami used a strange device and removed the Vasto Lord's mask and transforming him into an Arrancar. The newly turned Arrancar was surprised when he found that his more human-appearing body looked nothing like his body when he had been alive. He did not have blonde hair, no whisker marks, not even any of the scars he had obtained as a shinobi. In his Arrancar form and with his hollow powers sealed into a sword called his Zanpakuto, Ulquiorra had shoulder-length black hair with a bang of hair that came down in between his eyes. He had the same green eyes with vertical slits as before, with 2 green streaks running down from his eyes down to his chin like tears. His hollow mask fragment was a portion of his helmet on the left side of his face. He stood at 5'6" now and wore a white jacket with long coattails and a high collar, black sash, and a white hakama. A lot had happened over the years of his service to Aizen-sama. Ulquiorra took his place as a member of the Espada, a group of Aizen's 10 strongest Arrancar, with himself as the 4th strongest. Even so, Ulquiorra served Aizen-sama to the best of his abilities, doing everything he was ordered to do without question or hesitation. He kidnapped a human girl by the name of Orihime, and even fought an annoying human by the name of Kurosaki Ichigo, an insect who seemed to think that he was worth standing on the same level as he. As it turned out, perhaps this Ichigo had been right. He was powerful. As evidence of Ulquiorra's current state, Ulquiorra shook his head and looked at the Shinigami standing before him as he felt his body start to fade away. Kill me. Ichigo stepped back, his eyes wide and tense as he watched Ulquiorra's body start to dissolve into dust. He wasn't happy. He was disappointed. The human-turned Shinigami hadn't been the one to beat Ulquiorra. He hadn't even been able to land a meaningful blow on the espada. The whole reason that Ulquiorra was dying now was because Ichigo had transformed into a hollow midway through the battle and devastated the espada with a series of zero blasts. Ulquiorra's primary ability, high-speed regeneration, wasn't able to fully regenerate the injuries he had sustained. He was unable to replace the vital organs that had been obliterated. No. What was that? Was the espada's response, unable to do or say more than that. I won't do it. Ichigo said shakily before shouting. Two don't want to win like this. Ulquiorra's eyes widened and his eyes shifted back to green as he faded out of his resurrection form. He looked away and sighed woefully. You never did as anticipated, up to the very end. The espada turned his head and looked over to the other human looking at him with remorse, something which surprised the nihilistic hollow. Right as I was finally growing interested in you people. Ulquiorra reached out a hand to aura him, his expression as emotionless as ever. Do I scare you, woman? I am not afraid. Ulquiorra looked at the orange-haired woman for a moment, still reaching out to her. He had asked the same question as before, when Aizen-sama had said that Orihime no longer served any purpose. He had asked that question to her then, curious to know if the human felt fear for her impending death. Now he asked for a different reason. He was the one who was dying, and yet she appeared upset as she looked back at him. I see. He pulled his hand back as he felt more of his body turn to dust and watched as the woman quickly reached out to grab his hand, as if trying to give him some anchor to the world and keep him in it. Now I see. Ulquiorra thought as his arm dissolved and she still reached out to him, a sense of understanding flooding him. Her heart was right. Ulquiorra closed his eyes and breathed out the last breath he would take in Hueco Mundo as his body completely dissolved to dust and ash and scattered in the wind. In my hands. White light. Huh, who knew that there actually was a white light in death? Ulquiorra blinked in surprise at the realization of the thought. Then blinked in surprise again when he actually figured out that he was able to blink in surprise. Am I not dead? The espada looked around to see only more white light before looking down to himself, and his eyes widened and his face twisted into the first actual expression in over 100 years as a hollow. Half of his body was clad in the white clothes of an espada, his zanpakuto tucked in the sash. And his other side. On his other side were clothes he had almost forgotten. An orange jumpsuit and kunai holster strapped to his thigh. What is this madness? Ulquiorra spoke as he recognized the split forms. His previous life, Uzumaki Naruto, and current life, Ulquiorra Schiffer. Welcome Uzumaki Naruto and Ulquiorra Schiffer. Although I take no pleasure in saying this, I have been expecting you. Ulquiorra turned his head and his currently mismatched eyes widened when he saw himself suddenly standing in a vast white room before an equally large golden throne. This is. The occupant of the throne nodded and looked down to the dual soul. This is the throne room that your Aizen-sama wishes to enter. I have many names. The Shinigami King, Kami-sama. Buddha, Zeus, Jupiter, God, Jehovah. Ulquiorra looked at the occupant of the throne and narrowed his eyes in slight confusion when he saw this ruler that Aizen-sama believed to not exist. Whoever this being was, appeared to be nothing more than a 10-year-old boy. A mere child even to humans. The boy had no hair on his head to speak of, but several intricate and finely detailed tattoos covering the bald dome. The being's eyes were a myriad of color. Shifting through all the colors of the spectrum. The being, this Kami-sama, was wearing a simple outfit consisting of a pair of denim jeans and a really corny-looking Hawaiian shirt decorated with red and yellow flowers. Are you not going to greet me, Espada-san? Ulquiorra nodded slowly and bowed his head down in grudging respect to the Shinigami King, unable to think of any response worth speaking to the god. I guess that is as good as I can expect then. Kami-sama sighed, shaking his head. Now then, I suppose you want to know why you have appeared here since you should be dead. Ulquiorra nodded. Correct. Kurosaki Ichigo destroyed my body. I should not exist. I have no reason to. The Shinigami King let out a sad sigh and held his head in his hands as he looked at the dual appearance of the espada. You should have had reason to though. A deity I cannot control fate, however the book of Uzumaki Naruto was not supposed to come to a close at the tender age of 13. You were never meant to bear the burden of containing the Kyuubi no Kitsune all those years ago. Regardless of fate and what was meant to be Lord. In the end I was the container for the Kyuubi. And my life was but to an end at the age of 13. Ulquiorra stated. Be that as it may, this was not supposed to happen. The Shinigami King continued. It is for this reason that I have brought you here. But first I have a question for you. It is about the current state of your appearance. Ulquiorra looked down at his body again, taking in the dual appearances. Ulquiorra the Espada. And Naruto the Shinobi. Who are you? Are you Uzumaki Naruto, shinobi of Konohagakure no Sado and Juinchiruki of the Kyuubi no Yoko? Or Ulquiorra Schiffer, 4th Espada. The Shinigami King asked. Answer my question. I will not judge you for your decision. Ulquiorra held out his hands and looked at the two. His pale left hand and tanned right. I am Ulquiorra Schiffer. I have found more purpose and reason as an Espada than I ever did as Uzumaki Naruto. The Shinigami King nodded in understanding. I see. But answer me this. You say that you have found more as Ulquiorra than as Uzumaki Naruto. What of the Hyuga? Hinata was her name. Did you find someone in Hueco Mundo to replace her? Ulquiorra's eyes widened at the name. Hinata-chan. Because Hinata looked down sadly, more tears flowing. Because, I love you Naruto-kun. I always have. And I wanted you to know that. To know that even if everyone else has abandoned you, I'm always by your side. Ulquiorra looked away from the Shinigami King and down to his Naruto side. Hyuga Hinata. The one person, human, hollow and Shinigami alike that had tried to be there for him. The only one who had been there for his death as Uzumaki Naruto. The closest he had come to her as Ulquiorra Schiffer was in Orihime. They both had the same hidden fire. The same unyielding gentleness in them. It was also the same reason he had targeted Kurosaki Ichigo so fervently. The orange-haired human had served as a reminder of the once living Uzumaki Naruto. It had been uncomfortable to punish the human for unknowingly serving as a reminder, but Ulquiorra had felt that it had to be done, that Kurosaki Ichigo needed to be made aware of his own foolishness for the blind faith he had in his friends. It had not served Uzumaki Naruto, and it would not serve Kurosaki Ichigo. At least, that had been the Espada's belief. I do not require someone like Hyuga Hinata. I have acquired the heart of Orihime. The Espada answered finally. Her heart. The Shinigami raised an eyebrow. Have you disregarded the Hyuga woman so completely Ulquiorra Schiffer? Ulquiorra shrugged. Hinata-chan is better off without one such as me. A love that she proclaimed cannot exist. I have never seen such a thing so it cannot exist. Hinata-chan will have found someone to replace her so-called love. The Shinigami King shook his head and stood up, walking over to a single picture frame that decorated the wall to his left. He turned to look at Ulquiorra and gestured for the Espada to join him. Ulquiorra obeyed and stepped over to the Shinigami King. Through this frame I view the world. Allow me to show you the Hyuga Hinata you have tried to forget. Ulquiorra watched as the empty picture frame was filled with a bright blue light for a brief second. When it cleared, the Espada saw a sight he thought never to see again. Konoha. The view showed an eagle-eye view of the village. He could see all of the sights he had once loved. The Hokage Mountain. The Great Fire Gates. Even Ichiraku's raiment stand. The scene shifted to a well-kept room, and Ulquiorra's eyes softened for the first time in 100 years when he saw Hinata kneeling before a small shrine in her room. She appeared to be in the middle of prayers to whomever the shrine was dedicated to, and Ulquiorra was almost sad to see that he had missed so much in the time he had been dead. It was a curious thing. In the 100 years he had been in Hueco Mundo, it appeared that only as much as 3 short years had passed in Konoha. Hinata had grown into a beautiful woman. Her dark lavender hair had grown long and hung midway down her back. She was wearing a light gray and purple jacket and a pair of shinobi cargo pants, and it appeared that her bust size had grown along with her, making her one bombshell of a woman. She has been praying at this shrine in her room every day now for 3 years. Without fail. The Shinigami King interrupted. She prays every morning and again before missions. But to who? Ulquiorra asked. Who do you think? The picture shifted to an over-the-shoulder shot at the shrine, and Ulquiorra's eyes widened once more as he saw a photo of his old self. The blonde-haired boy with a wide carefree grin. Next to the photo was a scratched and worn Konoha headband, and behind that was a chipped ramen bowl. Naruto-kun. I miss you. Konoha has gotten really bad since you left. Hinata's voice echoed through the frame. The council has removed the Hokage and rules Konoha. Everyone has changed. I wish you were here Naruto-kun. Ulquiorra looked away from the image and stepped away, unable to watch any longer. Why do you show me these things? Is this a punishment for aiding Aizen-sama? The Shinigami King shook his head. Not at all. It is my hope that what I showed you would be enough to give you purpose. Purpose? Ulquiorra looked back to the deity. What purpose can you hope to inspire through images of a world long since taken from me? The Shinigami King smiled. For the same reason I brought you before me. I offer it as a form of penitence on my behalf. For allowing you to die in such a manner so quickly. I am prepared to return you to the world of the living. To the elemental nations in the form of your desire. I do not understand. What do you wish? Would you prefer the natural order of things as with all hollows and be sent to either the Soul Society or Hell? Or will you take my offer and return to the elemental nations as either Uzumaki Naruto or Ulquiorra Schiffer to be with a woman who still loves you? Uzumaki Naruto was killed by the people he thought his family. He will never return to the elemental nations. But neither do I wish to go to Soul Society. Ulquiorra answered. I am an Espada. I am Ulquiorra Schiffer. The childlike deity looked at Ulquiorra for a moment before returning to the throne, leaving the frame locked on Hinata as she continued to pray at the shrine to Naruto. You wish to stay as Ulquiorra? I cannot say I am surprised. As an Espada you had a power that was well and truly your own. I cannot say I blame you. Uzumaki Naruto was killed by those precious to him, while Ulquiorra died in Espada's death. You must hold quite the hatred for Konoha. I hold no hatred for Konoha. I feel nothing for the village that condemned me. However, I would like a chance to live a life. A full one this time. The Shinigami King nodded and stepped up to Ulquiorra. Then you have reached a decision. Good. I shall give life to Ulquiorra Schiffer and you will be given a second chance in the elemental nations as you are. The deity reached out and pressed a small hand against the Espada side of Ulquiorra. I must be honest, I cannot deny that I am curious to see how your world evolves with a living Espada. Ulquiorra felt a heated sensation run through his body and looked down to see the Naruto half of his body disappearing as his Espada uniform returned. When the Naruto half of him was completely gone and he was fully Ulquiorra once more, the Espada felt the same sensation as before when he had turned to dust start to overcome him and looked over to the Shinigami King. You will waken the elemental nations Espada-san. However, if I may offer some parting advice. Make your way to Sunagakure. Your friend Gaara appears to be in need of your help. But that Ulquiorra's vision returned to white and he knew no more. Ulquiorra woke once more and his eyes immediately widened when he felt an almost forgotten sensation. It was something that was indescribable. He was lying on a bed of wet grass. For the Arrancar it felt almost foreign and wrong. He who had known sand and nothingness for almost a complete century. To be lying now on the ground and feeling the morning dew moist grass against his skin. Ulquiorra was content to just lay there and enjoy the feeling of the grass when the Shinigami King's parting words echoed through him. Make your way to Sunagakure. Your friend Gaara appears to be in need of your help. At this the Espada rose to his feet and, using his Pesquisa, his ability to detect and identify spiritual pressure, he located Suna through finding a concentrated source of wind energy. He couldn't remember what Gaara's energy felt like, so he wasn't able to try and locate the Ichibi Juinchiruki, so he just focused on the wind energy, knowing that Sunagakure was the hidden village of wind, so it was logical that it would have a high concentration of wind-based energy. When he had a lock on it, the Espada filed the location away and gathered his Ryutsu. In an instant he vanished in a blur with the only sound to announce his departure being the sound of static. Ulquiorra used Sonido several times to leave the rich greenery of the forest he had woken in, and after a few minutes he entered a large desert. He had never been to Suna during his previous life, but he was nonetheless mildly interested when he saw signs of ancient civilization scattered throughout the sand dunes. As he flew over the desert, he noted a ruined temple, a broken statue. From the looks of the desert, it appeared as if it had not always been there and that there had once sat a grand city. In a way it reminded him of Hueco Mundo. With the exception of Las Noches, there were the occasional ruined temple and stone building out in the endless white desert. Another 2 Sonido movements and Ulquiorra came within sight of what could only be Sunagakure. He wasn't high enough in the air to see over its main wall, but he could detect several shinobi gathered at the narrow crevasse that most likely served as Suna's main entrance. The Espada used one more Sonido to come within a short walking distance and came to a stop behind a sand dune so as not to alert the Suna shinobi and those gathered by the main entrance. Before he walked out from behind the dune, he cast an eye over his appearance and zipped up the top of his white Espada jacket, covering the hole in his chest. That done, he put his hands into his pockets and walked out from his hiding spot and towards the main entrance. As he came within view of the entrance to Sunagakure, Ulquiorra felt a stab of primal anger, the first in a long time when he saw the people gathered there, in front of 2 Suna shinobi. Ada Kakashi, Haruno Sakura and Uchiha Sasuke. There was a 4th Konoha shinobi, but Ulquiorra did not recognize the 4th member, so he ignored him. The Espada was surprised when he felt his hand twitch in the desire to strike out at the Konoha shinobi. He instantly smothered the urge and approached them smoothly. It wasn't until he was standing next to Kakashi that the Konoha and Suna ninja noticed him, jumping back when they saw the lanky pale-skinned stranger standing there as if he had always been there. Identify yourself, stranger. Where did you come from and why are you here? The Suna ninja, a man with half his face hidden behind a cloth veil, spoke up. Ulquiorra looked at the Suna ninja and noted that it was the man that had been Gaara's Jounin sensei. Baka, Boken. Baki was it. My name is Ulquiorra Schiffer. I am a visitor from Hueco Mundo to see a shinobi of Suna. Subaku no Gaara. The Kazukiage. Why are you here to see Kazukiage-sama? Baki demanded, taking a stance that showed he was prepared to take action against Ulquiorra should the Espada provide a reason. He is Kazukiage. Ulquiorra mused aloud, surprised that the Juinchiruki had reached such a prestigious rank. Interesting. Why do you wish to know my purpose here? Are not ambassadors permitted to see your Kazukiage? Normally yes, however Baki lowered his guard a fraction when he sensed no hostility coming from the white-clad man. Gaara-sama has been kidnapped. Ulquiorra frowned. Who would want to kidnap Gaara? More to the point, who would be stupid enough considering the redhead's impressive power? How? And why would an ambassador form? Where was it? Hueco Mundo wished to know this. Kakashi finally spoke up, looking to Ulquiorra with a haughtiness that the Espada had hated when he had been alive the first time. My interests are my own Konoha shinobi. Ulquiorra spoke, looking to Kakashi for the first time. The Jounin took a step back, his single visible eye widening when he saw the merciless lidded green eyes staring back at him. For now I simply wish my questions to be answered so I may locate Gaara and conclude my business. Well, that might be difficult seeing as Gaara-san has been kidnapped by the Akatsuki Baka. Or were you not listening? Sakura enough. Ulquiorra turned to look at the Pinkat briefly before frowning. The Akatsuki. They have taken your Kazuki-age. He turned back to Baki. Baki looked at Sakura with an expression of annoyance, making it clear that the Jounin had intended on keeping the intimate details of Gaara's kidnapping a secret on a need-to-know basis. When he looked back to Ulquiorra he nodded. Hi. Kazuki-sama fought and was taken by an Akatsuki member. It was then later confirmed that there were 2 Akatsuki members present. Ulquiorra nodded as he processed the information. I assume then the Konoha is here to assist in his recovery. No doubt in an attempt to foster goodwill and favor rather than out of any genuine interest to offer aid. Kakashi narrowed his eye at Ulquiorra at this, as did Sakura and Sasuke, but said nothing. Baki nodded slowly. It would appear the Konoha is indeed here to offer help. They had just arrived moments before you appeared. Ulquiorra Dono. Would you like to join us as we make for the Kazuki Tower? Perhaps you may wish to offer your assistance if you wish to meet with Gaara-sama. Ulquiorra shook his head. Well, that will not be necessary. I do however have one request. In the interest of recovering your Kazuki, do you perhaps have a sample of his chakra? Why? I merely need to familiarize myself with Gaara-san's energy signature and patterns and I will be able to locate him. Ulquiorra explained. It has been some time since I last spoke to Gaara and so I cannot recall his presence. You're a shinobi then? Baki raised an eyebrow. Ulquiorra shook his head. In a past life maybe. Well, I must be honest, I do not feel entirely comfortable with you walking into this village with our current situation armed. Baki glanced at the katana at Ulquiorra's side. The Espada glanced at his Zanpakuto before pulling it out of his sash and holding it out to Baki. I will collect it before I leave. He had no problem with parting with his sword while in Suna to conduct his business. After all, these humans did not possess the strength and ability to pierce his harrow, let alone pose a threat. Baki hesitated for a moment, knowing full well what he had been asking. To most swordsmen, both samurai and shinobi alike, their sword was their life, it was a part of them. The Suna ninja knew full well that he had asked the equivalent of this ambassador, removing one of his arms. Finally he reached out and gingerly took the sword, holding it carefully. I will keep it with me so you can be assured that no one will attempt to take it. Ulquiorra nodded, noticing the pointed look that Kakashi and Sasuke were giving the sword, both trying to hide their desires to take that sword. Everyone could sense on some level that Ulquiorra's katana was no ordinary blade. If only they knew. With all that done, Baki motioned for Team Kakashi and Ulquiorra to follow him as he turned and entered the village. Excuse me, Ulquiorra-san. But where exactly is Hueco Mundo? I have never heard of such a place. The Espada flicked his eyes to the right to look at the pink-haired Sakura, who was looking up at him curiously. It was almost hard to believe that she had a mean streak the size of a Jillian. Almost. The vast desert kingdom to the north. Beyond the borders of the elemental nations. Ulquiorra answered, speaking a half-truth. And you traveled all this way on your own? You must be quite strong. Sasuke spoke up, sizing up the Arrancar and taking in his appearance. Ulquiorra returned his attention back to where he was walking. Or simply you are very weak. If it takes 4 people to cross a distance such as Konoha to Suna. Sasuke glowered at the pale-skinned Espada and moved to hit him when Ulquiorra turned his head and looked at Sasuke, his eyes devoid of any concern and pity. Do my words offend you, Uchiha Sasuke? I would think that you would be accustomed to your state of being by now. The Konoha shinobi all blinked in surprise when Ulquiorra spoke Sasuke's name, as none of them had ever introduced themselves to the pale man. Ulquiorra-san, you should show some respect. A foreign dignitary you may be, but Sasuke is a clan head. He deserves respect even from you. Kakashi spoke, sounding perhaps too pleased and prideful. A single loyal Uchiha does not classify as a clan. Was Ulquiorra's response. Sasuke by now was leveling a large, to everyone else, amount of killer intent at Ulquiorra. Less than pleased that his authority was being challenged. You should be respectful, Ulquiorra Schiffer. Sasuke said, a sneer lighting his face. The last person who disrespected me was executed as a traitor. Ulquiorra flicked his eyes back over to Sasuke, knowing full well who the Uchiha was referring to. Oh, Uzumaki Naruto. He used to be a Konoha ninja and our teammate before he decided that he would challenge the true order of things. He even tried to have me killed. Ulquiorra looked to Sakura and then Kakashi. Considering this was a Konoha shinobi you are referring to, I can accurately assume that he was presented with irrefutable evidence of his betrayal and given a chance to defend himself. I have heard tales of Konoha's glowing justice system. Kakashi scoffed. There was no need. Yeah, that monster had been terrorizing our village for years before we finally put an end to him. Sakura smiled. You should have seen the traitor's face when our former Hokage, Senju Tsunade, convicted him, it was priceless. I take it Uzumaki Naruto and Senju Tsunade were close then. He did not expect such harsh treatment. Sasuke laughed. Nope. The bitch was about to allow that moron to go free and put me behind bars before the council and I got to her. We put her under a massively strong genjutsu and forced her to do it. Afterwards she screamed and cried like a pathetic weakling. Ulquiorra nodded, noticing with passive interest that he seemed to be becoming quite emotional over the matter. It was strange to feel genuine anger after so many years. Perhaps I shall visit Konoha in the future. I am sure Hueco would like to trade with Konoha greatly. Oh, what does Hueco trade in? Kakashi asked with interest, pleased that the story of how they had executed such a traitor seemed to have sparked what could appear to be trade negotiations. Ulquiorra's mouth twitched into a smirk and he looked over to Sakura and Sasuke as if sizing up livestock. Human life. The Konoha team froze at that, feeling the wave of despair that seemed to wash off of Ulquiorra as he looked at Kakashi's two students before leaving them and catching up with Baki. I apologize Ulquiorra-san. Baki said in a hushed tone as the Espada joined up with him. Konoha has fallen in the past few years. According to Kazuki-sama, that ninja, Uchiha Sasuke, actually tried to abandon Konoha in favor of one of Konoha's S-class missing ninja, Orochimaru. Uzumaki Naruto was part of the team sent to retrieve the Uchiha, and when the Uchiha resisted, Uzumaki Naruto was forced to use force and bring back the traitor in an injured state. It was because of this that Konoha had him killed, twisting the reality of things. Ulquiorra nodded. Pardon me for asking a question I have no business to, but why does Suna remain an ally of Konoha if the relationship is less than favorable? Konoha has applied a threat of war should we negate the treaties we have with them. Even a neutral stance will have them attack us. And Suna does not have the military might to defend against the combined forces of Konoha. Things are even more tense with the Konoha council now in charge. Ulquiorra raised an eyebrow. I have heard of this in some fashion. The seat of Hokage has been abolished. Baki nodded, making sure that his voice was now enough so that not even Kakashi could hear the conversation. Shortly after the execution of Uzumaki Naruto, the council staged a coup against the goddamn Hokage Tsunade-sama. They overthrew her and locked her in a cell. There is speculation on what sparked this move. Rumors flew that Tsunade-sama had been planning to have Uchiha Sasuke brought to trial for his affiliation with Orochimaru. The official story that Konoha released was that Tsunade was an Akatsuki spy and was working with Uchiha Itachi to kill Uchiha Sasuke. Ulquiorra nodded. When Gaara returns I would speak with him on this matter. Baki nodded and ended the conversation as they arrived at the Kazekage Tower. They entered the building and after a few minutes and flights of stairs, the group entered a small infirmary occupied by Gaara's siblings, Temari and Kankuro. Ulquiorra stepped to the side, hands still in pockets, as Sakura stepped up to the injured Kankuro and started treating him. While she was doing that, Baki walked over to Temari and whispered in her ear before walking back over to Ulquiorra, the blonde following. This is the Kazukige's sister, Subaku no Temari. Temari-san, this is Ulquiorra Schiffer. An ambassador from Hueco. Baki introduced. Temari nodded, her face stained with tears while still trying to look calm and determined. Baki-sensei tells me that you may be able to find Gaara. Ulquiorra nodded. I simply need a sample of his chakra. Do you have any of the sand from his gourd perhaps? Temari nodded and pulled a small vial out of her pocket, the glass tube filled with sand. Gaara asked the Kankuro and I both carry these, so he could always find us. Ulquiorra nodded and looked at the vial. As soon as he had the energy signature he cast out his Pesquisa. After a few seconds he found a trail of Gaara's energy that started just outside the village and revealed a discernible path of where Gaara had been taken. May I speak with you in private? The Espada looked to the two before flicking his eyes at the clearly eavesdropping Kakashi. The two Tsunade nodded and let Ulquiorra out of the room. Kakashi-san, Temari and I will show Ulquiorra Schiffer to a room where he may wait for you to return with Gaara. I will be back in just a moment. The silver-haired ninja nodded and turned his attention to the workings of his female student as she removed what appeared to be poison from Kankuro's body. Outside the room, Baki and Temari led the Espada up to the top floor and into Gaara's office. Once inside, Baki flew through some hand seals and muttered a phrase under his breath. The resulting effect was a brief flash of purple along the walls of the room. I have sealed the room. No sound will travel outside these walls. Baki explained. Ulquiorra nodded. Gaara has left a trail of his chakra for you to follow. It appears that during his battle with the Akatsuki just prior to his capture, he kept his sand armor on him so that as he is taken it will crack and fall away, leaving a trail of his sand for you to follow. How do you know that Gaara encases himself in an armor of sand? Tamari asked, not fully trusting the almost white-skinned stranger. I have seen Gaara use it before. Ulquiorra answered. Although only once it was enough. At any rate, the reason I asked to speak with you in private is so that I can inform you that I know where Gaara is and I will be going out to retrieve him at once. Why don't you want the Konoha shinobi to know? These are 2 Akatsuki members we're talking about. You could use all the help you can get. Baki pointed out. Ulquiorra shook his head. A mere human does not have the power to be a threat. And I have no desire to be limited by Konoha. The 2 Suna ninja blinked at this, looking at the thin pale man curiously. Was it just them or did Ulquiorra seem to behave like everyone else was inferior to him? In 2 hours you can inform Konoha that there is a trail of Gaara's chakra-enhanced sand to follow. That will be plenty of time for me to acquire Gaara and return after they have left to rescue the Kazukiage. Are you sure that you do not need help, Ulquiorra-san? I don't really feel comfortable in relying on a stranger who has no real reason to ensure Gaara's safety. Tamari asked. Ulquiorra nodded and took his Zanpakuto back from Baki and slid it back through the sash around his waist. I understand, Gaara will explain when he returns. For now I will depart. Before Baki and Tamari could do or say anything, the white-clad man turned around and, to their complete surprise, vanished in an instant, leaving only a brief sound of static in his wake. Several miles away a white-clad form materialized, startling several birds and the local wildlife at the sudden appearance. Ulquiorra frowned as he looked around, picking up Gaara's trail easily. He had been forced to execute double the amount of Sunado movements to travel the distance he had so far. It was strange, he did not feel diminished in any way. His power was still at the level that had earned him the title the 4th Espada. Perhaps it is a result of the transference from spiritual to living tissue. The Arrancar mused aloud. However, if that is the case, then how can I breathe with a hole in my chest? At this, Ulquiorra unzipped the top of his coat and looked down to the small hole that ran through his chest. The telltale sign of his hollow status. If he was well and truly alive, then he should have died with that hologain. Food for thought. Was the Espada's reply to himself as he cast his Pesquisa out as far as he could along the sand trail left behind by the Kazukiage. Focusing briefly, he flickered away with another Sunado. Another 3 Sunado movements and Ulquiorra came to a stop at the edge of a cliff overlooking a small canyon with a large river at the base. He flicked his eyes over the area before finally settling his gaze on a large red arch positioned in front of an equally large boulder, marked with what appeared to be a seal of some kind. Disappointing. The Espada frowned as he stepped off the cliff and walked towards the boulder, walking down on thin air as if there was an invisible set of stairs before him. One would think that an organization filled with rogue shinobi such as the Akatsuki would be more adept at concealment. When Ulquiorra came to stand on the river's surface in front of the boulder, the Espada turned his head to the side and clicked his tongue in annoyance. A seal that requires its counterparts to be removed at the same time for the protection to be removed. He muttered as he sensed the locations of 5 other identical seals scattered around the area. If I still possess chakra, it would be a simple matter. However, I do not. The Arrancar stared at the sealed boulder for a moment longer before mentally shrugging and pulling his left hand out of his pocket and pointing a finger at the obstruction. If the seals are not removed correctly, it is impossible to deactivate the barrier. These humans should know impossibility does not exist. And with that, Ulquiorra focused his Ryutsu to the tip of his finger, a small ball of green energy appearing. 10 minutes ago. Sasori, Deidara. Are you certain you were not followed? The 2 Shinboi looked over to a glowing image of a man with glowing light purple eyes, marked with several rings. The man was hidden beneath a representation of the same Akatsuki cloak they were both wearing. Of course, Leader Sama, there's no way that those Suna ninjas followed us after Sasori Dono laid all those traps, yeah. The blonde-haired Akatsuki nin nodded, a positive smirk on his face. Well, perhaps you would like to tell the individual making his way towards us that he is lost then. Deidara and Sasori both blinked and looked to Leader in surprise. Someone followed us. Sasori spoke, his grating voice sounding both amused and surprised. How far out? He will arrive within 5 to 10 minutes. At this, every member of the Akatsuki, both hologram and flesh and blood, looked to Leader with wide eyes, even the stoic and emotionless Uchiha Itachi. How did they get this close without you noticing, Leader Sama? You losing your touch? One of the other members said with a laugh, his blue eyes filled with mirth. Enough hiding. This is a serious matter. We are only 50% complete with the extraction of the Ichibi. Leader glared at the blue-eyed Haiden. If we are interrupted now, then we will have failed and our goal will prove to be that much harder. Well, then send out one of us to deal with the upstart. I'm itching for a good fight. An Akatsuki with beady wide eyes and spiked hair spoke. The intruder is too close now for an intervention team to stall for time. Kiss him. Our best bet lies in the barrier seal protecting the entrance. With luck the barrier should hold long enough for us to complete. It will take some time to locate all the seals, and this intruder is no Hyuga. Leader shook his head. For now, everyone focus as much chakra as you can spare into the removal. Sasori, Deidara, prepare for the arrival of the intruder. It is inevitable he will penetrate the defenses. No sooner had this order been given when leader's eyes flicked over to the entrance, widening slightly, the only outward sign that he was surprised. He is here. 8 other sets of eyes widened and snapped toward the blocked entrance. Shocked that the intruder who had been 10 minutes travel even for a cage, had suddenly appeared at their front door in mere seconds. It will take some time to penetrate the barrier. Sasori, Deidara. Prepare. No sooner had this order been given when the entrance exploded violently as a beam of green energy. Every member of the Akatsuki, even the stoic and unfeeling Sasori, shivered at the feeling the blast gave off. It felt wrong. Empty and completely inhuman. As the blast of energy faded, the Akatsuki heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Sasori and Deidara quickly jumped down from their positions and faced the entrance, trying to peer through the dust and debris that had been kicked up in the explosion to identify the intruder. Impressive. The barrier was stronger than I anticipated. A cold, unfeeling voice commented from within the dust cloud. I do hope that the strength of your barrier reflects on your own power. It would be regretful to overestimate you. When the cover thinned, the Akatsuki were given their first view of the mysterious intruder. Deidara's eyes widened when he looked at the figure. A slender man with pale, deathly skin wearing a completely white outfit and a sword strapped to his side. The man had a face that was so unique and blank that it actually inspired in the blonde. Green eyes with black slits and 2 green streaks running from his eyes down his cheeks like tears. Black hair that hung down past his ears, a black upper lip, and what appeared to be a fragment of a bone-white helmet on the left side of his head. I must commend you, stranger. I did not expect you to possess the power to destroy my barrier. Leader complimented, recovering first. Do you have a name? Ulquiorra Schiffer. The man spoke, the same empty tone carrying out of his mouth. You must be the Akatsuki. And why are you here? You do not seem to be a shinobi loyal to any village. So why have you come here? Ulquiorra raised a hand and pointed to the body floating in a bubble of blue energy in the middle of the room. Gaara. I will be taking him from you. Leader said nothing as he looked at Ulquiorra before shaking his head. A foolish endeavor. Sasori, Deidara, dispose of this annoyance and resume the extraction. The two nodded and went to move when Ulquiorra spoke up. It seems that you have forgotten the reason I am here. And that is to rescue Gaara. I will be doing this now. Not after you have extracted his biju. Before any of the 2 actual present Akatsuki could counter or even attempt to prevent Ulquiorra from moving, the Espada lifted his left hand and pointed at the looming silhouette of the multi-eyed statue that was sucking the Ichibi out of Gaara. Every member of the Akatsuki gasped and their eyes widened, even the stoic Itachi and leader, when streaks of black and green light started to appear from nowhere and gather at the tip of Ulquiorra's finger, forming a small orb. As impressive as the sight was, the spectacle was muted to the incredible and nail-biting fear that they all felt from the mere aura of the energy. It felt so empty and devoid of human sympathy and seemed to breathe a sinister quality. Zero. Deidara and Sasori leapt aside and out of the way as the orb of black and green-lined energy shot out into a beam, exploding forward with the sound of a negative electrical discharge. Like radiostatic, the energy beam shot past the motionless Gaara and the holographic Akatsuki and exploded into the statue. Ignoring the urge to take stock of the devastation, Ulquiorra vanished from sight through the use of Sonido and appeared below Gaara, catching the red head and moving instantly back to the entrance, placing him there and checking his vitals. As he did so, the Espada turned his head to look at the statue as the debris cloud dissipated. The Espada clicked his tongue in annoyance when he saw that the damage done to the weird-looking statue was purely superficial. At most, the worst he had done to the statue was chipped a tooth. Isiro seemed to be weaker. Strange. The pale-skinned Arrancar mused aloud as he nodded minutely when he located a weak but stable pulse in Gaara. The Kazakiage was still alive. Boy, we ain't done with him, give him back. One of the holograms, Haiden, demanded, pointing at Ulquiorra. Deidara, stall him so I can come down there and send his pasty ass to Janshin-sama. Ulquiorra raised an eyebrow and looked up to the blue-eyed Haiden. Curious. I did not think humans were so eager to end their lives. Perhaps I really have been too long separated from humanity. This caused several Akatsuki members to blink in confusion at the detached way Ulquiorra had referred to humans. As if they were separate to him. No matter. Ulquiorra mused as he returned his hands to his pockets as he stood up and stepped away from Gaara, turning to face Deidara and Sasori with an almost bored expression in place. When I am done here I will have ample opportunities to refresh myself. The moment he had finished speaking, Ulquiorra faded out of sight in another static-sounding blur, only to reappear behind Sasori's hunched form, his right hand raised. There was the loud sound of wood being shattered as Ulquiorra delivered a devastating backhanded slap to Sasori, shattering his body. Or at least it would have had the body that Ulquiorra bitch slapped to hell, not actually been a puppet. The real Sasori jumped out of the shattered remains of his puppet, having been safely shielded from Ulquiorra's strike. The real Sasori turned to face Ulquiorra, and the Espada noted with mild interest that the Akatsuki member, despite feeling to be older, appeared to be as young as 16, maybe 18. The puppet master had messed red hair and smooth almost marble-carved features. The two wore an Akatsuki cloak. There is no cause for fear, puppet master. Ulquiorra turned his head to Sasori. You need not cower within your puppets to face me. It is expected for you to feel some sensation of fear. A measure of intelligence even. Sasori's expression didn't change to what seemed like a highly arrogant and cocky taunt as he merely walked back to stand next to Deidara, who had jumped away from Ulquiorra when the Espada had struck Sasori's puppet. Geez, that was fast, yeah. I almost lost track of him there. Deidara grinned as Ulquiorra turned to face the two Akatsuki ninja. Shut up, Deidara, if you have time to talk then you have time to attack. Sasori spoke in a monotone as he pulled out a small scroll from the back of his cloak. There was a brief explosion of smoke from the scroll as Sasori unrolled it, which, after it faded, revealed a tall humanoid puppet with long messed brown hair wearing a tattered cloak. Let's end this quickly and get the Ichibi Jinchuriki back in place. The red head finished as he flicked a finger. The puppet twitched before shooting towards Ulquiorra, gears and joints turning and making a cracking and popping sound as it flew at the pale Arrancar. Ulquiorra didn't move as the puppet approached, merely holding his hand out ready to bitch slap another puppet to oblivion. The Espada's eyes widened a fraction when a black sand-like substance started to flow out of the puppet's sleeves and shifted into the form of a large blade. Ulquiorra parried the blade with his hand as it came down, aiming to sever his arm and swatted it harmlessly to the side. See, he's just a man, like the rest of the world. Sasori voiced. Ulquiorra frowned and looked down to his hand and blinked in surprise when he saw that there was a shallow cut on the back of his hand, dark red blood starting to leak from it. The cut through my hero, iron skin. Impossible, this one does not possess the power to breach my hero. He is nothing to Kurosaki Ichigo. How? Ulquiorra mused as he looked at the cut with keen interest. My Zero is weaker, Sunito diminished, and now my hero is thinner. Why? Ulquiorra snapped himself out of his musings and looked back up to Sasori and Deidara. Curious. Do you not feel fear, Akatsuki? Your behavior is strange. Piss of pasty. Deidara grinned, holding his hands up and revealing a pair of smiling mouths in the palms of his hands. You ain't nothing to worry about, yeah. If we can cut you, we can kill you. Ulquiorra shook his head. More humans who do not know the meaning of despair. He muttered. Allow me to show you despair. Deidara's eyes widened when Ulquiorra vanished from sight, the same static sound heralding his movement. The blonde's eyes widened even further when he felt a hand grip his right forearm. He turned to look at the pale intruder and screamed out in pain as Ulquiorra's blade sliced through his arm as easy as through the air around them. Ulquiorra tossed the arm away and sheathed his blade before grabbing Deidara by the back of his cloak and tossing him away. Through all this, Sasori hadn't moved to even assist his comrade. Although Sasori was starting to wish he had when he saw that he now had the undivided attention of the raven-haired being. It seems that you and your comrade have been abandoned by your cohorts. Ulquiorra noted, gesturing behind him to where the holograms were, now gone. Abandoned. Or sacrificed. Sasori narrowed his eyes and directed his puppet to attack Ulquiorra. The puppet fired off a storm of iron sand bullets, making it as impossible to dodge as it was to stay dry in the middle of a downpour. Yet Ulquiorra managed it. The Espada vanished and blurred around the cave in rapid succession, avoiding every single iron sand bullet with the same blank, almost bored expression in place. Sasori hid his surprise at the ability to dodge the storm of sand, over which his puppet and by proxy, he had complete control over, and prepared for his next attack as Ulquiorra stopped moving, now that the threat was gone. You are a truly arrogant creature, Ulquiorra. I will enjoy making you into one of my works of art. Sasori spoke, subtly pouring chakra into the puppet. Your high-handedness is astounding. You have witnessed the bloodline that my puppet, the Sandaime Kazukiage, has. Dominion over the iron sand. Do you really think that his sovereignty ends as soon as the sand has been used once? Ulquiorra's eyes widened as the black sand that surrounded him exploded into motion and rose up to block all exits. In a way, it reminded Ulquiorra of the intelligence gathered on the Shinigami captain of Squad 6, Kichiki Byakuya, and his Zanpakuto Senbonsakura. Seeing that there was no feasible exit and knowing that the sand couldn't have penetrated his hero, Ulquiorra drew his sword. I will attempt to conclude this swiftly. Enclose. Murcielago. Sasori's eyes widened, and his very soul was filled with the most vivid and complete sensation of fear and despair as he lost sight of Ulquiorra in an explosion of black and green energy. Before the energy even began to disperse and give the Akatsuki member a view of the pale man, his eyes widened even further as 3 green lances of pure energy shot out of the darkness. Sasori felt a sharp stab of pain as one of the lances hit the one place his artificial body was vulnerable, the sealed compartment that contained his heart. When the energy surrounding Ulquiorra did finally dissipate, the Espada was resheathing his Zanpakuto and walking up to the now prone body of Sasori. Do you understand it now, Akatsuki toy? Have you come to terms with your despair? Ulquiorra crouched down to the puppet master. What was it? Ulquiorra blinked in mild surprise when he heard Sasori's voice. A zero javelin to the heart would have killed a lesser man. You live. Interesting. Your shell of a body is more durable than I believed. Noyao have ekalim. Sasori twitched his head in a negative shake. My history will not exist much longer. I see. Then to answer your question, you witness my true power. Ulquiorra answered. Perhaps our impressive Sasori's voice was starting to sound scratchy. Like a record player. Before D will impart Nell's gift to the world, have speakle said Archimera was on them and twixt him the bridge the word offers in the land of reverse. Pillar Archimera form. But that Sasori's body shook before it finally stilled, the head falling off as the chakra keeping the puppet body of Sasori fading away. Ulquiorra frowned and removed the ring from Sasori's left hand and slipped it into his pocket before pulling off Sasori's Akatsuki robe and other clothing items. He could already sense that Deidara had fled shortly before he had briefly released his Zanpakuto abandoning Sasori, so he had the peace to remove his Espada clothes and slip on Sasori's uniform. His reasoning was simple for dunning the colors of the Akatsuki in favor of his own white uniform. In this world, the Akatsuki inspired the same fear that the Espada did for the Shinigami. Plus any of his movements that might attract a negative focus would fall to the Akatsuki and not to himself. Once he was dressed, Ulquiorra tucked his clothes into a small supply pouch. How the clothes all fit into it was beyond him, and slipped his Zanpakuto through the sash he had tied around his waist. Now dressed and satisfied that his main hollow feature, the hole in his chest, was concealed, Ulquiorra moved over to Gaara and picked him up. The Espada performed a quick Tsunade and moved to a position a good 100 feet in the air above the Akatsuki hideout. Biting a finger in his free hand, Ulquiorra pointed at the hideout and channeled a large amount of Reiatsu to the bleeding appendage, forming a large twisting ball of energy. It will not do for the Akatsuki to return there. Grand Ray Zero, Grand King's Hollow Flash. Another beam of energy, this time blue and far more dense than before, shot from Ulquiorra's fingertips. The Grand Ray Zero exploded into the section of forest above the cave and collapsed, filling the cave and destroying everything within it. His work there done, Ulquiorra vanished once more and reappeared in a secluded clearing several miles away from the hideout. Resting Gaara on the floor, Ulquiorra turned and left the Kazakiage, heading for the nearest source of water he could sense. The redhead had been through quite an ordeal and would no doubt be thirsty. He had taken no more than a half-dozen steps when he felt his feet being encased inside a generous amount of sand. Akatsuki. Ulquiorra turned his head to see Gaara struggling to sit up, holding a hand out towards the Espada to direct the sand that was rising out of the ground to further trap Ulquiorra. You are awake. Surprising, I expected you to remain unconscious for a further hour or two. Gaara shook his head to clear his thoughts and forced himself up to his knees. Forcing himself through the intense fatigue he felt, glaring at the pale-skinned Akatsuki man. I'll kill you. Ulquiorra shook his head and turned around, walking over to Gaara, breaking out of the incomplete sand coffin without effort, to Gaara's surprise. When he was standing over the Kazakiage, Ulquiorra reached down and pulled Gaara to his feet. I am no ally of the Akatsuki. The clothes I wear are the property of a former Akatsuki member, Sasori. Akasuna no Sasori. S-rank missing ninja of Suna. Gaara's eyes widened. He had not known that the infamous puppet master was part of the Akatsuki. If you say so. I only knew his name as Sasori. Ulquiorra shrugged. I killed him shortly after rescuing you from the Akatsuki's attempt to extract your Biju. You saved me. Why? Gaara raised an eyebrow suspiciously. Ulquiorra frowned and thought back to his encounters with Gaara as Uzumaki Naruto. Because. We are brothers. That one like nearly caused Gaara to fall back to the ground. The significance of that one statement causing the Kazakiage to enter a world of surprise and denial. No. Impossible. You were executed. He whispered before looking at Ulquiorra intently. Trying to find some trace of the teen he had once known. Naruto. Ulquiorra nodded. I was once known as Uzumaki Naruto. My execution and the betrayal of those close to me has changed that. You may call me Ulquiorra Schiffer. But how? I read the report of your death. You were killed by Chidori at the hands of Uchiha Sasuke. Gaara asked, sounding more emotional than ever before. Ulquiorra nodded and undid the first 2 buttons on his cloak and pulled it aside, revealing the hole that ran through his chest. His hollow hole that also marked the spot of his death. I passed away. Moved on to the other side. Became what is known as a hollow. A departed spirit who had lost their heart due to unfinished business or uncountable negative emotion. Gaara remained silent as Naruto, no, as Ulquiorra explained his death and what had happened immediately after and his rebirth as Ulquiorra's Schiffer. But if you were really dead, then how are you here? Gaara finally asked. Am I dead? Ulquiorra shook his head and allowed a small smile, the first he had ever managed in 100 years, to him at least. You are very much alive. When I died as a hollow, Kami-sama allowed me to come back to the world of the living to live once more. Either as Uzumaki Naruto or Ulquiorra's Schiffer. And you chose this identify because I have achieved more and found more acceptance as Ulquiorra's Schiffer than I ever did as Uzumaki Naruto. Ulquiorra answered. I did not die traitor's death as Ulquiorra as I did before as Naruto. I understand. Gaara nodded. So what now? What will you do now? I would be honored to give you a place in Suna if you would like. Ulquiorra shook his head. I am afraid I have more pressing matters to attend to at the moment. When I stopped by Suna I learned a great many disturbing things about Konoha from your sensei and sister. It turns out I was not as completely abandoned as I was made to believe. Konoha has rallied against Tsunade and overthrown her for supporting me. I intend to retrieve her. How? Don't mistake me, I am impressed that you possess the strength to defeat Akasuna no Sasori and repel a second Akatsuki member, but this is Konoha. The strongest of the hidden villages. How do you expect to get in and out with Tsunade Dono? Through the front door. Gaara felt a sweat drop form at the back of his head as he looked at Ulquiorra. As different the raven-haired Espada seemed from the Uzumaki Naruto he had known, Ulquiorra was still very much like his former self. The front door. Of course, how silly of me. Gaara nodded. Are you stupid? Ulquiorra raised an eyebrow at this, he could not remember an encounter where Gaara had raised his voice in a manner that wasn't bloodthirsty. Konoha is vastly different than the village you know Naruto. Ulquiorra. The pale man interrupted. Whatever. Gaara waved a hand dismissively. The village is under a state of martial law. Everyone who enters the village is subjected to thorough examination. The entire village is under constant surveillance, and in addition the area you will need to infiltrate is overseen by the best Anbu team in Konoha, as well as a squad of Hyuga. That is problematic. Gaara merely raised an eyebrow in amusement. May I offer a suggestion if you are going to continue this on your own? Ulquiorra nodded, looking to the Kazekage. Get rid of the Akatsuki look and try and pass yourself off as a civilian. I can tell just through a cursory glance, but your chakra levels are minimal. You don't feel like a shinobi, so how you killed Sasori is beyond me. Ulquiorra nodded. I will however need to find a way to put in place a binding sealer too however. He noted before elaborating, seeing Gaara's curious look. I may have a civilian's level of chakra, but my spiritual pressure. What I use instead of chakra is significant. The only reason you can stand as you are is because I am consciously suppressing my power. Unchecked you would be hyperventilating. Gaara raised an eyebrow in interest, almost wishing to be given the chance to sense the suppressive power that Ulquiorra claimed to have. Well, if you stop by Tenzuka town on your way to Konoha there should be an amateur seal master there who could help you. Beyond that the only one I know who can create the kind of seals you're after is Jiraiya Dono. Ulquiorra shook his head. Tenzuka town will suffice. Now before I depart I must ask you of something Gaara. You are to keep what was spoken here a secret. No one must know that the one formerly known as Uzumaki Naruto walks the earth once more. I am not prepared for that kind of attention just yet. Gaara nodded in understanding, he knew perfectly well why Ulquiorra wished to remain off Konoha's radar. If the fallen village learned of his return they would hunt him relentlessly to execute him once more. And with no allies to speak of it, would only be a matter of time before Ulquiorra is killed, again. Are you fit to travel alone Gaara? I would prefer not to return to Suna as of yet. Ulquiorra asked. Why? Did Suna not welcome you? The red-haired youth narrowed his eyes at the prospect, not appreciating the idea that his people had not welcomed Uzumaki Naruto, despite what carnation he may now be in. That is not the case. I wish to avoid returning to Suna as Konoha's team Kakashi was sent to retrieve you and it would be best that I avoid further contact with them. The Espada explained. I believe that Hada Kakashi may suspect that there is more to me than was previously established. Gaara nodded. What will I say to explain my survival and escape from the Akatsuki? You may say that you were rescued by Ulquiorra's Schiffer if you like. But make sure you keep the connection between that name and Uzumaki Naruto a secret. The Kazekage nodded. I will expect to hear from you in the future. If you require safe haven after you are finished in Konoha I can offer it. Ulquiorra bowed his head in gratitude. Thank you Gaara. Now Suna is 235 miles northeast of our current location. If you leave now you should come across one of your border outposts. I look forward to our next meeting Gaara. And congratulations on your ascent to the rank of Kage. But that the Espada turned around and shot into the air, leaving a small crater in his wake as he focused a great deal of Ryatsu to his feet to fly into the air, leaving the wide-eyed and jaw-dropped Kazekage, Gaara behind. 3 days later Ulquiorra was standing outside the large red gates of Konohagakure no Sado. After his trip to Tanzuka town he had purchased a set of clothes and supplies, giving favors instead of cold hard cash. Currently he was wearing a pair of blue cargo pants with a white and silver studded belt hanging loosely from his waist and a black button-up shirt with a black undershirt to cover his hollow hole, over which he wore a white jacket that came midway down his thighs. His Espada uniform and Sasori's Akatsuki uniform were sealed away in a small travel scroll designed to react to Riastu, as opposed to chakra which he had hidden in a hollow tree a few miles away from Konoha. His Zanpakuto was stored in a cloth covering and slung over his back to give the appearance that it was for defensive use only. In addition to his attire he was also carrying a shoulder bag filled with writing supplies. Also in addition to his new items, he had found and commissioned a containment seal that had placed onto a leather choker which was wrapped around his throat. Currently it sealed away 90% of his Riatsu. In his sealed state he was unable to release his Zanpakuto, as well as form the Grand Ray Zero. His own Zero and Bala were diminished, and his Hero was now as strong as any other human. All in all Ulquiorra hated it. "Can I help you, young man? You've been standing there for quite some time now." Ulquiorra turned his head and looked over to the two Konoha shinobi, Chunin it seemed judging by their flak jackets. "I apologize. I have never been to Konoha before and lost myself in the sight." The two Chunin seemed to accept this as their bodies relaxed back into their seats. "Understandable. It happens all the time. Now what brings you to the greatest village in the elemental nations?" Ulquiorra resisted the urge to shake his head at the sheer arrogance of that statement and settled for approaching the two Chunin. "I'm an aspiring writer and wish to explore Konoha's many sights and attractions for inspiration of my next book." "An author? Do you have any publications out yet?" one of the two asked, looking quite docile and believing Ulquiorra's story almost too easily. The Espada answered by shaking his head in the negative. "Not as of yet, no. It is my hope that Konoha will provide significant inspiration to finish writing." "What kind of book is this to be?" the second Chunin asked, looking at Ulquiorra with a more appropriate suspicious expression. "Man-made wonders." Ulquiorra answered smoothly. "I have already been to and documented the twin statues at the Valley of the End, as well as the Grand Wall at Sunagakure. So your first stop would be the Hokage faces?" the first Chunin suggested. Ulquiorra nodded. "I am greatly looking forward to the site. Can you suggest any other sites for my book, Ninja-san?" "You will not be given access, but the Hokage Tower is an architectural marvel," the second Chunin put in. "Now then, if you can sign the visitor register here and subject yourself to a check of your personal items, then we will allow you entry into Konoha." Ulquiorra nodded and handed the first Chunin his bag and leaned over to sign his name on the visitor register. Ulquiorra Schiffer. "The item on your back, Schiffer-san?" the second Chunin asked, briefly leaning over to check the name. Ulquiorra pretended that he had forgotten the item and shrugged it off and handed it over. The first Chunin opened the long bag and pulled out his katana. "Interesting accessory choice, Schiffer-san. A katana. The world is not the safest place to travel these days. An unarmed rider attracts far more trouble than an armed rider," was Ulquiorra's answer. "The katana has sentimental value, it was given to me by the man who inspired me to become what I am." "Oh? And who is that exactly?" the second Chunin asked as he returned the miscellaneous writing items back into Ulquiorra's bag. "Aizen Sasuke-sama. You would not know him. He has never been to this region," Ulquiorra answered. Finding it fitting to mention Aizen in this new world. The two Chunin looked at each other, as if silently coming to a decision on the pale-skinned author. "One last question. Your eyes. I do not mean to be offensive and discriminate, but they do not look normal," the first Chunin asked, looking at Ulquiorra and his green cat-like eyes. "Birth defect? I do not remember my parents, but I know that I was born in a small village near Mizugakure," Ulquiorra answered. "I had it examined years back when I had a fleeting interest in the shinobi lifestyle and hoped it was a bloodline. Sadly it is merely cosmetic." The Chunin guard seemed to accept this as they handed him back the bag and his Zanpakuto. "You are to remain in the designated civilian areas and are warned not to attempt to draw your weapon or behave in a threatening manner. If you breach any of the laws of Konoha and the laws of the Immigration and Tourist Act provided." At those a pamphlet was handed to Ulquiorra. "You will be detained without bail and punished accordingly. Beyond that, on behalf of Konohagakure no Sado, have a pleasant stay and I hope your book is successful, Schiffer-san." Ulquiorra forced a polite smile on his face before passing the checkpoint and entering Konoha proper. It was a detached sensation of nostalgia as he looked at the strangely familiar, yet foreign landmarks and buildings. As he walked through he focused every ounce of his remaining Riatsu into his Pasquisa, casting it out over as much of Konoha as he could to detect the presence that he was after. So far he could sense the familiar presences of nearly all of the Konoha 9. All the rookies appeared to be training as he could sense their energy signatures coming from where the training field should be, if memory served him. He couldn't sense Team Guy at all, and so figured that they were out of the village on a mission. Focusing once more, Ulquiorra narrowed his search on finding more specific energy sources. He wasn't after a group of shinobi. He was after two individuals. After a few seconds of searching, Ulquiorra opened his eyes and resumed walking, heading for the clan district. As he left the main quarter, the Espada found himself surprised to notice that he actually felt nervous and a trace of apprehension. He had no idea how this would proceed. He was fully aware that he looked nothing like the Uzumaki Naruto who had lived and died here. The only thing that linked the two memories. Civilian traffic thinned until the streets were empty as Ulquiorra entered what he understood as a restricted zone. If he was caught here, he would either have to kill or be taken prisoner. A few minutes later of uninterrupted walking, Ulquiorra reached the large complex that housed the soul he was tracking. "Can I help you?" Ulquiorra turned his head and watched as a pale shinobi with long black hair and pale lavender eyes. Of course, when placed next to Ulquiorra, the shinobi's complexion may as well have been tanned to obsidian. "I hope so, Shinobi-sama. I am looking for the Hyuga complex, can you please direct me?" Ulquiorra asked, knowing full well that he was at the Hyuga's front door. "What business do you have with the Hyuga clan?" the Hyuga guard asked. "I am looking for one, Hyuga Hinata-sama. I am writing a book on the Great Five Villages and wish to document the significant influence that the dominant clans of each village have had. As the first daughter of the Hyuga clan head, I hope she will be invaluable to my work." The Hyuga looked at him carefully, no doubt evaluating his words, tone and body language to determine if the pale author was lying. Unfortunately for the Hyuga, Ulquiorra was as expressive as a brick. A tree had more tells than him. "You will wait here with your belongings on the ground 3 steps away from you. I will speak to Hinata-sama and determine if she wishes to see you." Ulquiorra nodded and did as instructed as the Hyuga turned and entered the complex. The Hyuga guard, a member of the branch family, navigated the halls and many gardens that surrounded the main family's primary building. Finally, the guard reached a door and took in a steadying breath before knocking softly. "Yes." The voice was so soft that the branch member almost didn't hear it. "Hinata-sama. There is a visitor at the main gates asking for you by name. Come in, please." The guard quickly lowered himself to the ground on his knees and opened the door, bowing respectfully. Like many of the branch members, the guard had leagues more respect for Hyuga Hinata than any other member of the main family, even the clan head, Hyuga Hiyashi. "I have a visitor." "Who?" The guard flinched at the question when he realized that he hadn't asked for a name. "My apologies, Hinata-sama. I failed to ask his name." What he did say was that he was a writer documenting the great villages. "He requested you by name." "Allow him in," the young woman said, still at her position in front of a shrine. A shrine to the Uzumaki boy, if the guard recalled correctly. "Right away, Hinata-sama." But that the guard bowed once more and rushed off. Hinata let out a deep sigh and returned her gaze to the picture of Naruto she had. "Naruto-kun." A couple of minutes later and Hinata looked up to her door as the guard returned, this time in the company of a second individual. Her eyes widened when she looked at the man. A very pale man with medium-length black hair and deep green cat-like eyes. On his head was what appeared to be a fragment of a white helmet mask. "Thank you, sir. You may go now." Hinata looked at the guard. The guard hesitated before nodding reluctantly and left. Once the guard was gone, Hinata stood up and motioned for the man to seat himself at the low table she had in the middle of the room. "May I know your name, sir?" The man nodded. "I am Ulquiorra Schiffer." "It is good to see you again, Hinata." At this, Hinata blinked, confused at the level of familiarity she detected in Ulquiorra's voice. "You know me? Once upon a time." Ulquiorra answered as he lowered himself onto a cushion. "I am aware that you do not recognize me, but when we last spoke you offered me comfort and spoke to me kindly. I know that you are a trustworthy person. You didn't come here to talk about a book you are writing, did you?" Ulquiorra shook his head, a small smirk on his face as he looked at the heiress. Hinata had grown in the last 3 years. She had grown her hair long, which now hung down at the small of her back, and from the thick purple and blue jacket she was wearing, Ulquiorra could tell that the once shy stuttering Hyuga had filled out into a complete woman. Very much like Orihime. "No, I did not. What I am to tell you, I must ask that you do not allow it to leave this room." Hinata nodded, curious about what the strange man wanted, but still cautious of deceit. "I am here to free Senju Tsunade." That one sentence caused Hinata to cover her mouth as a gasp tried to flee from it. What? But how? And more importantly, why? As someone important to me said, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, but what reason do you have to free Tsunade-sama? Ulquiorra didn't answer, instead looking over to the picture of him before his execution as Uzumaki Naruto. It was almost strange to look at a picture of a boy that used to be him and not recognize the sight. "Schiffer-san." Ulquiorra turned back to look at Hinata and frowned as he looked intently at the woman she had become. 3 years. In only 3 short years she had grown so much, well, for him it had been just short of 100 years. "I have lived a long life. Said many things. Heard many things." Ulquiorra said quietly, reaching up and running a finger along his shirt where the hole ran through his body. But out of every conversation I have been a part of, I recall one fonder than all. In that conversation someone dear to me came to me. She asked me for forgiveness in something that was not her fault. When I asked her why she was even speaking to me, do you know what she answered? Hinata shook her head, enraptured by Ulquiorra's story. She said the same thing that I now say to you. Ulquiorra placed his hand on the middle of the table, almost as if reaching for her. I am always by your side. Hinata blinked and her mouth dropped a half-inch as she processed the phrase. I'm always by your side. She could only remember one time she had heard that said before. And she was the one who said it. To Naruto. What you are suggesting is beyond impossible. Tsunade-sama is guarded by more than just shinobi. There are seals in place that prevent the use of chakra. The entire level that her cell is located was designed to keep her there. Reinforced steel, chakra-brewed concrete. It was designed to imprison a cage, pure and simple. But not me. Hinata blinked. I don't understand. I was able to enter Konoha unchallenged as a tourist and walk to the Hyuga complex unchallenged. Ulquiorra stated. I do not use chakra. Much like Rock Lee, I am incapable of it. And also like your comrade, I do not need it. Who are you? Ulquiorra blinked. I have already introduced myself. My name is Ulqui. I don't mean your name Schiffer-san. Hinata narrowed her eyes. You are not a civilian nor a ninja. Who are you? You may think of me as an espada. Ulquiorra answered, mentally smirking at how aggressive Hinata had become. She had been so meek and quiet when he had been Uzumaki Naruto. Expert swordsman among other things. Hinata was about to demand that Ulquiorra further explain himself when the green-eyed man stood up and pocketed his hands. If you wish to come with me, I would suggest you pack your belongings. I doubt you would enjoy much freedom once this is over. But why would I do that? I am loyal to Tsunade-sama and wish I could help her. But why would I abandon everything I have in Konoha to risk getting her out? Hinata asked, still not completely sold on Ulquiorra's desire to reenact the Great Escape. I will make a deal with you. Assist me and abandon this village with Senju Tsunade and I will give you something that I can tell you want more than this village. And that would be? Ulquiorra walked over to the shrine that Hinata had set up in her room and picked up the photo of him. Would you like to know what happened to Uzumaki Naruto's soul? At this, Hinata exploded off the floor and grabbed Ulquiorra by his shirt, pushing him against the wall and, with surprising strength, lifted him a good half-foot off the ground. Naruto-kun. How do you know Naruto-kun? Speak. Ulquiorra didn't even flinch at the threatening move as he looked down to her. Do you believe in the afterlife? That when someone dies, a piece of them moves on? Hinata nodded. I like to think so. It comforted me to think that Naruto-kun had gone to a better place. Well, assist me and I will tell you what I know and give you some measure of closure and understanding. How do I know you are speaking the truth? Ulquiorra flicked his eyes over to the fallen picture frame before looking back to Hinata. You were the last person to visit Uzumaki Naruto in his cell prior to his execution. It was there that you confessed your love for him. And before he died he looked at you and smiled to offer some measure of comfort even in the face of death. Hinata's eyes widened and she let go of Ulquiorra and stumbled back, tears glistening. How do you know that? I never told anyone. Ulquiorra frowned and bent down and picked up the picture of him and looked at it for a moment before returning it to the shrine. Like I told you. Assist me and I will tell you what became of Uzumaki Naruto's soul. An hour later and Ulquiorra and Hinata were sitting on a stool at a very familiar and comforting place for the Espada. Ichiraku's raiment stand. Hello there Hinata-chan, what brings you here and with company I see. Friend. Or more. Hinata blushed and sent a half-hearted glare at the speaker. Oji-san. Be nice. This is Ulquiorra Schiffer. Schiffer-san, this is Ichiraku Tenchi, he is a good friend and trustworthy person. Ulquiorra nodded his head in greeting as he folded his hands on the bench. Ichiraku-san. Hey, it's either Teki or Oji-san. Any friend of Hinata-chan's is like family here. Now what'll it be? Hinata looked at the ramen chef dead in the eye and spoke one phrase. Uzumaki special. At this Tenchi's eyes twitched and his entire body seemed to freeze. I see. Tenchi looked behind the two before turning his head and shouting back. Closing up early. We just hit the jackpot and Uzumaki special. There was a sound of dishes being dropped and Ulquiorra almost flinched when he heard the sound of what must have been AM hitting a button, which resulted in a heavy roller door slamming down at the entrance. Once the stand was effectively closed for business, Tenchi opened the side of the counter to allow Hinata to walk into the back. You coming Ulquiorra Schiffer? Ulquiorra almost didn't stand as he tried to process what was happening. I am afraid that you have lost me. What is going on? Hinata didn't tell you. But if you are here then you must be involved. Tenchi started to look as confused as Ulquiorra now. There wasn't time. Schiffer-san is here to free Tsunade-sama. Hinata turned away from Tenchi and looked to Ulquiorra. I said I was loyal to Tsunade-sama. I didn't say I was the only one. Come. Meet the resistance. Ulquiorra didn't say anything as he stood up and picked up his belongings and stepped around and into the back following Tenchi and Hinata. When the Espada walked into the back room, he blinked in surprise when he saw AM pulling open a fridge door to reveal an entranceway to what appeared to be a large room. I know it's cliché, you know, a hidden room behind the fridge, but it works. Tenchi smiled as he and AM stepped through the open door followed by Hinata. Ulquiorra hesitated as he peered into the fridge and down the narrow hallway that led to a brightly lit room. Ulquiorra felt a distant memory poking at the back of his mind as he looked into the fridge. A memory of a movie in the human world he had glanced while on a mission for Aizen-sama. The movie had been called Race to Witch Mountain. The line that struck him. Don't go in the pimped out fridge, Jack. Ulquiorra snorted quietly and stepped into the fridge and walked down the small, narrow hallway. This hesitation was unlike him. Took your time? You get lost. Ulquiorra looked around the room as Tenchi spoke. The room was lightly decorated, but everything in it appeared to be in good order and what would be expected in the headquarters to those who claimed to be a resistance. There was a scale model of Sunagakure in the middle of the room and a conference table to the left of the room, which was where AM, Hinata and Tenchi were seated. It's not much, but it is enough for us to get things done unnoticed. AM said as she stood up and walked over to Ulquiorra. We haven't been introduced. My name is Ichiraku AM. Ulquiorra finished, surprising all three. I am Ulquiorra Schiffer. It is good to see you again. You know me? Forgive me, but I can't seem to remember where we have met before. Ulquiorra shook his head. You would not recall. I have not been in Konoha in what seems to be 3 years. So you were here when Naruto-kun was executed. Hinata looked at Ulquiorra. In one form or another. Ulquiorra answered. But this is a conversation for another time. I said I am here to get Tsunade. Instead you bring me here, why? You aren't the only one who wants to free Tsunade-sama. Schiffer-san. Hinata answered. Ichiraku's raiment stand serves as a haven for those who follow Tsunade-sama and not the orders of the council. Unfortunately we only have a few members. The Nara clan, as well as the Inyazuka pack and a single member of the Aburam family, my teammate Shino-san. That sounds like quite a resistance. 2 clans as well as clan heirs of the Hyuga and Aburam clan. Who have you done nothing so far? Ulquiorra asked. We don't have enough power or pull to do anything but fill graves. Even with the support of both the Nara and Inyazuka clans, there are still several other shinobi clans, as well as Konoha's entire shinobi force to deal with. Yeah, simply put, we are in a bit over our heads. Tenchi said in annoyance. So kid, what's your plan? How large a force do you have to get Tsunade-sama out? Ulquiorra shrugged off his 2 bags and pulled out his zanpakuto and placed it on the table. Myself and my weapon. And this is my plan, gather everyone who wishes to leave with Tsunade and assemble outside Konoha, the Valley of the End. Hinata and I will get Tsunade. Just you? How are you going to do what all the people we have on our side cannot? AM asked, looking at Ulquiorra like he had just grown a second head. It is a simple matter. Ulquiorra picked up his zanpakuto and slid it through his belt. I walk through the front door and destroy anything that gets in my way. The 2 Ichirakus nodded slowly at this before Tenchi grabbed his hair in frustration. That's a terrible idea. Did Hinata tell you about the security that has been put in place to stop anyone breaking the Hokage out? Ulquiorra nodded. Well, walking in the front door isn't an option. First off, there isn't even a front door. Secondly, you are going to get cut into tiny pieces and burned to ash before you get within 20 feet of the complex. Ulquiorra shook his head. There is no problem. I will not be in Konoha anytime soon. The Espada stood and made for the exit muttering under his breath. Once is enough for me. Hinata picked up on the muttered comment and she looked at Ulquiorra with a confused expression, half believing she may have misheard. When Ulquiorra exited the fridge, the Hyuga stood up and followed. Do as he says, get everyone out of Konoha and make for the valley. Tell them to pack light for mobility, but to make sure they bring everything clan related. Let's not leave Konoha anything that they can benefit from our departure. And you? I'm going to follow Ulquiorra, see what he's up to and if he is going to break Tsunade-sama out, help him. The 2 ramen chefs nodded and when Hinata left, they went to work. Another chapter done and dusted. For those who were asking why Ulquiorra is weaker now than he was in Hueco Mundo, it is a result of being alive and possessing a living breathing body as opposed to Hueco Mundo where he was just a spirit. As for his hollow hole and how it doesn't make sense for how he is still alive with a hole in the middle of his chest, it will be explained in due time. Where are you going, Schiffer-san? Ulquiorra turned around and saw Hinata following him. After leaving the ramen stand, through the back door, the Espada had left the area and made for the slums of Konoha. Having a small urge to see what became of his apartment. You need not address me like that, Hyuga Hinata. Ulquiorra is fine. The pale man spoke. Alright then, Ulquiorra. Where are you going? Ulquiorra pointed ahead of him to a run-down apartment block littered with graffiti and propaganda posters. Apartment 413. Was that your apartment when you lived here? I didn't think anyone lived in that building. It's been condemned for years. Ulquiorra shrugged as he came to the building and pushed open the door. As evidence of the rundown state of the building, the door came off its rusted hinges and fell to the floor with a bang as Ulquiorra tried to open it. The Arrancar looked at the door for a brief second before stepping on it and walking over the door and into the building. "How long has this building been condemned, did you say?" he asked as he wiped a hand over his shoulder, dislodging a small spider that had fallen on him. 16 years at least. Hinata answered. When the Kyuubi attacked, the civilian council had the building declared unfit for human inhabitation, claiming that the foundations were unsafe. Ulquiorra frowned as he started up the first flight of stairs. "How long did you live here?" 9 years. Came the Arrancar's answer. "I moved here when I was 4 right up till I was 13. You lived on your own at the age of 4. Hinata's eyes widened. "In a place like that? Who could be so cruel to put you here?" "The Konoha orphanage. I was told I had a family waiting for me here, and when I came here the director of the orphanage told me that this was where I was to live and that if I ever returned to the orphanage they would cut off my feet and feed me to the Inizuka's hounds." Hinata gasped at this. "That's horrible. How old are you now?" "I don't know. I believe 16 years have passed since my birth." Ulquiorra answered as he came to a stop at the door labeled 413. "I wasn't very well liked here." "Well, that doesn't seem to be the case now, Chief Ulquiorra," Hinata said, correcting herself. "I have changed a lot since I was last here, Hyuga Hinata. Remember when you asked if we had met before? If you looked at who I used to be and who I am now, you would not be able to connect us." "How sad." Ulquiorra blinked and turned to look at Hinata, his hand frozen on the doorknob to his old apartment. "Pardon? I have physically changed so much to be unrecognizable to any who were important to you. To be greeted like a stranger," Hinata explained. Ulquiorra furrowed his eyebrows and looked away from her in thought. Was that the sensation in his chest that he had felt when he had greeted Hinata and Tenchi? The hollow ache right where his hole was. "Hinata, tell me, what is heart to you?" Hinata blinked in confusion, looking to the strange-looking 16-year-old man, wondering where this question came from. Statements like "my heart is at peace, a heavy heart, what does this heart to you?" Ulquiorra asked, thinking back to what Orihime said of her heart. "My heart is in my feelings. Each made of a piece of the feelings I hold to those important to me," Hinata answered. "The heart you talk about, I see it as the part that cares for and is cared for by others." "Why?" Ulquiorra looked down to his chest, pressing a hand against the hole under his shirt as he thought. "Is this why I have my hollow hole? I have changed so much that the people who still care for Uzumaki Naruto cannot give me their feelings and my own heart." Ulquiorra pushed the door open and walked in and immediately felt the wave of nostalgia and familiarity of the apartment of Uzumaki Naruto. His apartment. Strangely enough, everything was still there and in the same order he had left it before the mission to retrieve Uchiha Sasuke. Albeit there was a significant layer of dust covering everything, but everything was in its proper place and not vandalized in any way. Surprising, since this would have been the first place demon haters would have gone to destroy after his death. Could it have been possible that they hadn't known where he had lived? "You lived here?" Ulquiorra nodded as Hinata entered behind him. The former Espada wandered around the room, taking everything in as Hinata looked around as well. For the fourth Espada and aspect of emptiness, it was important for him to visit the place of his former life. To know that it had actually existed. Ulquiorra may have not believed in anything he couldn't touch and see, but he wanted to believe that he had once been Uzumaki Naruto. Truth be told, after he had become an Arrancar he had lost faith in this truth. Beginning to believe that he had instead consumed the soul of the poor blonde and assimilated his memories. By coming here, it was a way for him to know for certain. Had he once been Uzumaki Naruto? And he had his answer. As he looked around the room, he felt a keen sense of familiarity with the room and instinctively knew that these things were his. It wasn't detached emotion he was feeling. It didn't feel in any way like his room had belonged to someone who he had eaten. This was his room. He had been Uzumaki Naruto, loyal genin of Konoha and executed martyr. On the other side of the room, Hinata was looking around the living room while Ulquiorra loitered around the kitchen. She could tell from the dust that no one had been here in at least 2 years, giving credit to Ulquiorra's story. And judging from the state of the furniture and that there were only the bare necessities, it seemed that when Ulquiorra had lived here he hadn't entertained guests very often, no guests at all if she guessed correctly. Hinata's attention was soon taken when she saw 3 photo frames resting on a small bookcase. She stepped up to the 3 and picked one up of the frames and wiped away the layer of dust. Her eyes widened at what she saw. It was a photo of a team of genin and a single jounin. Had a Kakashi, Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke, and Uzumaki Naruto. It was a photo of Team 7 taken shortly after graduation from the academy. She put the photo down after lingering on Naruto's face, who was glaring at Sasuke, and picked up the second one, wondering why Ulquiorra had a picture of Team 7. Was he related to one of them? She wiped the dust from the second picture and it was a picture of Iruka-sensei and Naruto sitting at the ramen stand. Hinata by now was confused and turned to look at Ulquiorra as the black-haired 16-year-old walked out of sight into the bedroom, still apparently deep in thought. It wasn't possibly, was it? She went to look at the last picture when Ulquiorra walked back out and started for the front door. "We are leaving." Hinata quickly nodded and gave one last look at the apartment before following after Ulquiorra, looking at the man questioningly. That had been Naruto-kun's home. It had to be. But if that was so, then why was Ulquiorra saying it was his? When the two exited the building, Ulquiorra turned to her and pulled his Zanpakuto out from his belt, still in the sheath, and held it out to her. "Take this." Ulquiorra saw her uncertain look as he held out his weapon to her and pressed it into her hands. "Take my weapon and guide me to the building where Tsunade is with your Byakugan activated. We can get close under the pretenses that you are taking me in for questioning after you found me trespassing." Hinata nodded. "How real do you want it to look?" "As good as you can make it." Hinata nodded and reached behind her into her supply pouch. And pulled out a band of leather. "All Konoha ninja are required to carry these nowadays. In case we find enemy spies or anyone, it is a restraint that is applied in the place of handcuffs and seals chakra." Ulquiorra nodded and held his hands out. Hinata wrapped the leather band around his wrists, locking them together, and with a quick application of chakra, the material sealed and bound his hands tightly. "Anything else?" Hinata asked as she turned Ulquiorra around and started to guide him through the streets. Ulquiorra nodded. "The choker around my neck. It is a seal that binds my real power. If we are found and made, or when I say, remove it." The Hyuga girl nodded. And continued walking. 10 minutes later the two were walking down a quiet street deep in the heart of the government district. The quarter was where the Hokage Tower was, as well as Anbu headquarters, Ibiki's department, the Hunter Division and the Shinobi Archives. Everything related to the shinobi and military world was in this district. It was also where Tsunade was being kept. "Chunin Hinata, what are you doing here? Isn't your team on leave?" Hinata and Ulquiorra looked up to the roof of the building to their left and saw the masked figure of an Anbu officer. The mask was designed to look like an owl with a kanji on the right cheek for root. "Anbu-san, I captured his man in the Hyuga compound, attempting to steal trade secrets. I'm taking him to holding," Hinata said, giving Ulquiorra a forceful push which brought him down to his knees for emphasis. "I will take him from here, Chunin Hinata." "Good work." The Anbu jumped down from the roof and moved to take Ulquiorra when Hinata pulled the espada back, tipping him to the ground. "This man attempted to steal Hyuga clan secrets. By the honor of my name and clan, it will be me who takes him in." Hinata's face grew angry as she clamped a hand down on Ulquiorra's shoulder tightly, altogether making a convincing appearance. "I will of course submit a report to the council explaining my actions, but I am under orders from the Hyuga clan head, Hyuga Haishi, to see this through personally." The Anbu didn't react in any outward way at this, apparently considering what was said. Ulquiorra could sense Hinata's slowly growing concern. Finally the Anbu's head nodded in agreement and he stepped aside, allowing Hinata and her prisoner to continue. "I will inform the council to expect your report at the end of the day, Chunin Hinata." The Hyuga nodded and picked Ulquiorra up, who was still sprawled on the ground, and forced him forward. A minute after they lost sight of the Anbu, the two came into sight of a medium-sized, two-story bunker. Ulquiorra could already detect the signature of Tsunade within the building. Apparently her cell was located underground, as it seemed that the building itself was empty, but there were multiple living beings underground, directly below or around the immediate area of the bunker. "This is where Konoha keeps all the S-rank criminals too powerful to risk execution," Hinata explained as they neared the building. "At the moment only Tsunade-sama and her aide Shizune Dono are within. Because of the bunker's security, it will take some time before anyone comes to realize that we should not be here." Ulquiorra nodded and allowed Hinata to push him forward and up to the door of the bunker. Hinata reached past Ulquiorra and turned the door handle, only to hear it click and resist. The door was locked. Hinata swore under her breath. "The door is locked. The only people with a key would be members of the council and high-ranking jounin." Ulquiorra reached out with his bound hands and pressed them against the door. "We have no time to spend hunting down keys. We need to move." Hinata's eyes widened when she watched the pale-skinned man pushed against the door, and the door, locked and resistant enough to survive a blow from even Mitogai at full power, ripped off its hinges and fell inwards. How? Ulquiorra ignored her and stepped into the darkness of the bunker, looking around. Now is not the time to hesitate. The noise will attract attention. "Come." Hinata nodded and followed after the green-eyed being into the room. As she passed over the door she looked down to it, and her eyes widened in curiosity and wonder when she saw scorch marks on the door where Ulquiorra had struck it. If she didn't know better, she could have sworn that the strange man had struck the door with his chakra. But that was impossible. First of all, Ulquiorra's chakra levels were that of a civilian. Secondly, he was wearing a seal that suppressed chakra as well as that seal choker, which did something. The two managed to avoid any confrontation for the first half of the ordeal. They reached the stairs that led down into the catacombs of the prison, and Hinata noted, as she had suspected, that the entire building was designed to prevent the use of chakra, as she wasn't able to activate her bloodline. She is this way. Hinata looked over to Ulquiorra and raised an eyebrow in curiosity when she noted that it seemed as if he knew exactly where he was going, despite the barriers and seals. Pardon, but I was under the impression that this prison where Tsunade was being kept was state-of-the-art and designed to be impossible for anyone to escape. Ulquiorra turned his head and looked back to a visibly nervous Hinata. Exactly. Escape is impossible. Getting in is easy. Once you want to get out, however, she let it hang as nothing more needed to be said as the two came to stop in front of a heavy steel door. We are here. Senju Tsunade is within the cell. Ulquiorra voiced as he turned around. Please return my weapon and remove my bindings. Hinata nodded and slipped the leather cuff off Ulquiorra's wrist. It was easy to remove without chakra, as since her chakra had gone into it in the first place, the restraints recognized her and so deactivated automatically. After the cuff was gone, she handed him back his katana, which he slid back through his belt. With his Zanpakuto returned, Ulquiorra examined the door before frowning in annoyance. This door was stronger than the other one he had blown away with a low-powered bullet. It required more power than he could access with the seal in place. The Espada focused on the Reiatsu that was sealed, focusing on restraining it further with his own will. Hyuga Hinata, you are not going to die here. You are perfectly safe and not in danger. Ulquiorra said quietly as he reached up and started to undo the clasp of the choker. You Ulquiorra? What do you mean? She asked, not understanding why he was attempting to offer comfort when nothing appeared wrong. Ulquiorra turned and looked at her for a moment before sighing. I was attempting to offer comfort and reassurance. In a moment you will feel unease and despair from a great power. It was my hope to give you some measure of comfort so you may weather it. Hinata looked at the 16-year-old with a confused expression. It seemed odd to him, that much she could tell. He seemed uneasy or uncertain of how to behave or react emotionally. Even his attempt at comfort seemed distant and strictly professional. She was snapped forcibly out of her thought process when Ulquiorra removed the choker from his neck and pocketed it. The feeling was instantaneous, frightening, and, had Ulquiorra not spoken previously, would have destroyed her will and hopes. She couldn't believe that someone with only a civilian level of chakra could feel like this and inspire such hopelessness. Primera Huelga. First strike. The words were only whispered from Ulquiorra's mouth, but Hinata heard it nonetheless, wondering what language he did see and understand his actions, however, as Ulquiorra's hand flashed to his katana and with a single swift drawing movement slashed at the door before returning the blade to its scabbard. Hinata believed that the strike had been either completely ineffective against the door or missed completely when Ulquiorra stepped up to the door and pushed against it. Her eyes widened when the sound of metal scrapping together screeched through the hall as Ulquiorra pushed on the door until the heavy metal slab fell to the ground with a crash, coming out of its hinges from its own weight and falling into two pieces, cut clean in half. The Hyuga teen shook herself out of her shock and ran into the cell, brushing past Ulquiorra and looking at not one occupant but two. Senju Tsunade and her loyal apprentice Teshima Shizune. Both women were bound to the far wall, arms out wide like they were on display. And naked as the day they had been born. Ulquiorra frowned and walked into the cell, shedding his coat and taking off his shirt as he walked up to the two women, leaving only his black undershirt on. Both women, while naked, were covered with paper tags, seals to make sure that they weren't able to use their chakra to Houdini their way out of their restraints. The restraints themselves were thick heavy iron shackles wrapped around their wrists and ankles. In addition to all this, both women were blindfolded. Who's there? SBQ coward, why you don't frighten me? Tsunade said, her voice sounding hoarse and carrying both the fear she truly felt as well as a deep-seated guilt and sense of defeat. Tsunade-sama, Shizune Dono, it's me, Hinata. The Hyuga ran up to the two, removing the blindfolds carefully, knowing that the sudden light would cause some discomfort to the two women. Tsunade blinked and squinted at Hinata as she came to terms with what was happening. Hinata-chan. What are you doing here? Have you been arrested as well? Hinata shook her head and turned to look at Ulquiorra, causing both Shizune and Tsunade to do the same. We are here to get you out. Ulquiorra nodded and offered the best smile he could, failing horribly, and handed his coat and shirt to Hinata. One moment. All three women gaped when Ulquiorra reached out and shattered the iron restraints with his bare hands, freeing the women. Hinata, cover them up and help Shizune to her feet. I will assist Tsunade. Who are you? Why are you helping us? Tsunade asked as Hinata covered her with Ulquiorra's white coat, giving her some dignity. I do not deserve to be saved. I couldn't even do that much for the boy I saw as family. Ulquiorra reached down with one arm and easily lifted her to her feet. My name is Ulquiorra Schiffer. I am helping you because I was told by someone important to me that you did not betray me. Swan looked at the pale man carefully, trying to figure out who this guy was. His strange green cat-like eyes, pale skin and the bone-white helmet mask fragment on the side of his head. You deserve to be saved because you have despaired and come to regret an action that was not your own. Ulquiorra continued as Hinata helped up Shizune, the medical assistant to Tsunade covered by his shirt. Tsunade became silent as Ulquiorra helped her leave the cell and, followed by Hinata and Shizune, started to navigate the hallways to head back to the surface. Along the way, Ulquiorra cast his Pesquisa throughout the subterranean complex, locating all other occupants and determining if they were converging on the current position of the escapees. The Espada frowned when he learned that none of the guards were attempting to cut them off and instead were remaining exactly where they were. He received answers when his attention turned to the main floor of the bunker at ground level. There were 2 Jounin-level shinobi waiting for the escapees. We will encounter resistance up at the bunker. He relayed back to Hinata. I will take care of them. Will you be able to continue with both Shizune and Tsunade while I kill these 2 shinobi? How strong? They appear to be Jounin strength, although not at the level of Hada Kakashi. Ulquiorra answered. Well then you will need backup. As impressive as what you have done so far, you can't deal with a Jounin-level shinobi unaided. Hinata debated, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small handheld radio. Your forces should all be en route to Suna by now. You have no backup to call and I do not require it. Ulquiorra reassured. Hinata didn't seem to listen as she activated the radio and spoke into it to whomever was on the other end. The bunker has been breached and the Slug Princess is saved. Require assistance. There was a garbled response from the other end of the radio before Hinata returned it to her pocket. Need it or not Ulquiorra, the backup would be helpful, plus he would want to come with us. The only reason he wasn't a member of the resistance is because he knows that he cannot deceive. Ulquiorra nodded as the 4 reached the stairs to the bunker and the exit. The Espada and Tsunade had only climbed up 3 steps when there was a whistling sound. Ulquiorra moved Tsunade behind him and swung his free hand out, backhanding the air. In response, 2 shuriken were redirected and embedded themselves into the wall to Ulquiorra's right. The black-haired Arrancar glanced at his hand to survey any damage to his harrow, unsure if he had managed to retune its density, and gave a small smirk when he saw that his hand didn't even have a scratch. Careful to keep Tsunade behind him, Ulquiorra resumed climbing the stairs, wary of any stray projectiles that might threaten to end the life of the slug Sannin and betrayed Cage prematurely. There were none. When Ulquiorra reached the top of the stairs, he immediately focused his attention on the 2 occupants of the room. 2 masked individuals wearing Jounin-grade vests and looking very menacing to any other human. Jounin Hinata. To think that you would betray your village. Your father would be disappointed. The lead-masked Jounin shook his head, his mask bearing the visage of a wolf. His counterpart, a large Anbu officer, wore a bear mask. It is impressive that you managed to get the traitor Sannin and her whore out without difficulty. However, we will kill you at this time, so your attempts were for naught. Bear chuckled. Ulquiorra shook his head and waited till Hinata was near him before letting the still weak blonde-haired Cage rest on Hinata's other side. Hinata, Tsunade, Shizune. This will only take a moment. The Espada stepped forward and pocketed his hands as he looked at the Jounin and Anbu with a casual disinterest. The same expression he gave all the foolish humans who had the arrogance to face him. Had this encounter happened in another setting, I would hold no current valid reason to destroy you. My grievance with Konoha has long since expired and become irrelevant. However, you stand between these 3 women and their freedom. Something they have every right to. Wolf laughed and snapped a kunai out and held it ready. You idiot. You're going to die here and you can't even see it. The Jounin flashed his hand out and sent the kunai flying at Ulquiorra, aiming at his heart with the intention of killing the civilian with a single blow. Ulquiorra didn't even move as the kunai struck him right on target. The weapon thudded against his chest, piercing through his black shirt before falling to the ground, not a single spot of blood marking its edge, showing that the Jounin's best throw hadn't even managed to pierce through the pale man's skin. My harrow cannot be pierced by the likes of you trash. Ulquiorra said. Phallicer. Die. Wolf's eyes widened and he turned around quickly to see Ulquiorra suddenly standing in between him and Bear, his katana in one hand and the other still in his pocket. Team. Wolf turned around fully to face the Espada when his eyes widened in sheer horror and pain. His top half had turned but his bottom half did not. Wolf's wide, disbelieving eyes looked at the katana the pale intruder was holding and saw its edge marred with blood before looking down to himself and seeing that he had been cut completely in 2 at the waist. But how? Those were the last words of Jounin Wolf as his top half slid off and thudded into the ground, shortly followed by his hips and legs as the legs of his disconnected body buckled, finally catching on that they were dead. 1. Pain. Kakakyo no Jutsu. Fire style. Grand fireball technique. Ulquiorra turned around to see that Bear had retreated a reasonable distance and had just released a large fireball from his mouth, the ball half the size of a human being. Ulquiorra. The Espada ignored Hinata's fearful cry as the ball of heated fire engulfed him and covered his body, leaving only his legs visible. Hinata screamed out as she watched Ulquiorra's body become covered in flames, the fireball hitting him squarely in the chest. Despite the fact that she had only just met the strange 16-year-old man, she felt a tear leak from her eye as she watched his death unfold before her eyes. Next to her, Tsunade and Shizune looked down sadly, both in deep regret and shame that their current weakness had prevented them from intervening and saving their rescuer's life. Bear grinned behind his mask as he brought his hands down from his face, satisfied he had used enough fire to punish the pale upstart for killing Wolf in such a manner. When the fireball, he grinned when he saw the charred body of the pale upstart, or at least, he would have had that been the sight to greet him. Instead he simply saw Ulquiorra standing exactly as before, his hands in the pockets of his pants that had survived untouched, his black shirt smoking as it continued to burn on his body, revealing untouched skin underneath. From appearances, the powerful jutsu hadn't even heated the teen in the slightest. Ulquiorra looked down to his attire and frowned when he saw that his shirt was charred, exposing his chest. And as an unfortunate result, his hole was at risk of being visible. He would not be able to avoid keeping it hidden. Ulquiorra focused his attention back to the Anbu officer and he flared his Riatsu, bringing down a crushing amount of raw killer intent, locking the poor human in place. As he stepped toward the trash that had dared attack him, Ulquiorra reached up and grabbed the remains of his shirt, pulling it down and ripping it off and throwing it away. While this was happening, Hinata was staring at Ulquiorra with an expression of shock and awe that was mirrored in the faces of Tsunade and Shizune. They found it beyond belief that this strange pale-skinned swordsman had just stood in the middle of a C-rank fire jutsu, and the only damage he had sustained was to his attire. Hinata's eyes widened as Ulquiorra started to vibrate with power, his aura glowing a vibrant green. Well, the sight in of itself was impressive and eye-wideningly worthy. That was not what had Hinata so shocked. It was the feel of the aura. She couldn't understand why it felt different than before at Tsunade's cell. Perhaps it had been a result of her own chakra being sealed. But it didn't feel like this giant frightening force. In fact, it felt familiar. Hinata's attention was soon taken when she saw 3 photo frames resting on a small bookcase. She stepped up to the 3 and picked one up of the frames and wiped away the layer of dust. Her eyes widened at what she saw. It was a photo of a team of genin and a single jounin. Ada Kakashi, Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke, and Uzumaki Naruto. It was a photo of Team 7 taken shortly after graduation from the academy. She put the photo down after lingering on Naruto's face, who was glaring at Sasuke, and picked up the second one, wondering why Ulquiorra had a picture of Team 7. Was he related to one of them? She wiped the dust from the second picture, and it was a picture of Iruka-sensei and Naruto sitting at the raiment stand. Hinata took a step back, earning confused looks from both Tsunade and Shizune at the Hyuga woman's actions. It can't be, and then they all saw it. When Ulquiorra ripped his destroyed shirt off and cast it aside, 3 sets of eyes widened as Tsunade, Shizune and Hinata looked at his back. And the fist-sized hole that ran through his upper body in between his shoulder blades. Right where Uchiha Sasuke had struck a killing blow to Uzumaki Naruto. And Naruto-kun. Ulquiorra heard the half-whispered half-cried utterance of his name and let out an almost sad sigh as he turned his head to look at a tearful Hinata. Almost. At that moment Ulquiorra's Pesquisa went nuts as he felt a new arrival tearing towards him and bare. It was strong as Kurosaki Ichigo's human friend. The Hispanic descendant, Sato Yasutora. Ulquiorra turned to the door to look at the new arrival when all he saw was a blur as it kicked Bear in the face. Dynamic entry. X. Booyah. Chapter 5 done and dusted. Damn, I'm good. Pause to beat back growing ego with a block of cheese. A quick note to all you readers about Ulquiorra Naruto. Since Arrancar and Espada techniques and titles are Spanish as app is to Japanese. All his techniques will be in Spanish to give it more Arrancar origins. He does not have his ungodly reserve of chakra as he is in pretty much a completely new body. So he uses his Espada level of Riatsu. For those who were wondering why his hero was so weak. Simply put, Ulquiorra wasn't aware that his hero is an effect that was on his spiritual body. Because he is alive it is dulled, so he needs to refine it a bit more for it to stand up to the level he was at when in Hueco Mundo. Ulquiorra blinked and simply followed the sight with his eyes as a shinobi in green spandex and eyebrows large enough to be sentient appeared from nowhere and delivered a devastating kick to Bear and sent him crashing into the far wall. The youthful beast of Konoha has arrived. Came the cry of none other than Rock Lee, standing in a victorious pose that would have had every man of questionable sanity crying at its perfection. Yosh. Hinata-chan, it is good to see Tsunade-sama and Shizune-sama free. But tell me, who is the most youthful one who has done this? Hinata looked at Lee with her tearful shocked expression frozen on her face before looking back to Ulquiorra, who was walking over to her and Tsunade and Shizune. It can't be. Ulquiorra picked up the former cage who had fallen to the floor at one point from sheer shock and looked back to Rock Lee. If you wish to come and leave this place behind it would be best that you step closer. Rock Lee frowned in confusion but complied nonetheless, walking up to Ulquiorra and the 3 speechless women. As Rock Lee approached, he took the time to actually look at the shirtless pale-skinned stranger. He was perfectly built, and from appearances, his body seemed designed for speed and deceptive power. But two things caught Rock Lee's curiosity and then shock. The first was a tattoo on his left pectoral muscle of the number 4. Rock Lee couldn't help but wonder the significance of it. The second thing he noticed had him in awe and shock: that this pale-skinned man was still alive, let alone able to breathe. A fist-sized hole that ran straight through his body in the middle of his chest just below his shoulders and collarbone. Hinata-chan, who is this? Ulquiorra didn't give the woman time to form an answer as he gathered the 4 ninja together before all 5 of them vanished in a blur and the sound of static. Several miles away from Konoha, deep in the forest a moment later, they reappeared, Ulquiorra wearing an expression of mild concern, which for him was the equivalent of anyone else having a panic attack, jumping up and down and pulling their hair out. The other 4 that had tagged along for Ulquiorra's Tsunade were looking like they were about to throw up, more so Tsunade and Shizune than Hinata and Lee due to their treatment while in solitary. What was Tsunade started before dry heaving. What was that? Tsunade? Ulquiorra answered, ignoring Hinata's still tearful look at the hole in his chest. In your language it would be echo step. It is a method of movement I can perform. Like a shinobi's Shunshin no jutsu, but far more powerful. Ulquiorra turned to Lee. Make your way to Suna, the Kazukiage will offer refuge. Stay hidden. Where are you going, Shiro-san? Lee asked, calling Ulquiorra white as he didn't know the man's name. I have one last matter to attend to in Konoha. Before Lee or even Hinata could stop the pale-skinned shirtless man, he vanished with another Tsunade. Hinata-chan, who is that? How does he live with an injury like that? Lee asked as he turned from the spot where Ulquiorra had previously stood to look at the purple-blue-haired Hyuga. It can't be. Did you feel it as well, Tsunade-sama? Hinata mumbled before looking to the blonde. Tsunade looked down at the white jacket that she was wearing, given to her by Ulquiorra to cover her naked and sealed form. I did. It felt just like him. And that hole. Right where the killing blow struck. I do not understand. You know this person? Lee asked, feeling left out. Lee-kun, who did you know that was hated by majority of Konoha, knows all of us, as well as Tsunade-sama and Shizune Dono. Who do you know that was killed by a blow right where Ulquiorra's hole is? Lee frowned as he thought for a moment, piecing these things together. A moment later his eyes widened and his massive eyebrows disappeared into his hairline. Impossible. It has to be. Shizune spoke up, looking over to where Ulquiorra had been standing with tearful eyes. Naruto-kun. Bear climbed out of the rubble of the wall he had been kicked into, growling angrily. When he got his hands on that green-wearing freak he was going to rip the kid limb from limb. He looked over to where the prisoners and Konoha traders had been standing only to find empty space. The Anbu officer swore loudly and flared his chakra to alert all high-level shinobi. Within minutes the council would be convened and a hunting party assigned to track and recapture the prisoners and those 3 brats. Bear stormed towards the door to address the men that were on their way to him when he felt a subtle change in the air pressure behind him. Did you think I was finished with you? A blank emotionless voice called from behind the Anbu. Trash like you sometimes is able to serve a purpose. Bear turned around and ripped out a kunai and held it at the ready when he laid eyes on Ulquiorra. Team. Have you come back to die? Your arrogance is interesting, Ulquiorra commented as he stepped over to the top half of the jounin he had killed, Wolf. Bending down, the Espada pulled off the jounin's vest and slipped it on, zipping it up so that his hole was concealed once more. As with many things, your existence has been without meaning. Ulquiorra spoke as he stood back up and started towards the Anbu, walking slowly but purposefully. I will give you meaning. Bear's eyes widened when Ulquiorra suddenly appeared in front of him. The Espada snapped his arms out and delivered 2 swift blows to the Anbu's arms, shattering the bones in his shoulders. The Anbu tried to flee only to have his entire body freeze up as he felt an unbelievable and ungodly level of killer intent slam down onto him, locking every joint down from raw fear. Do not fear, human. You are about to die for your village and council. Is that not what every shinobi aspires for? Bear was unable to form a coherent sentence as Ulquiorra's hand flashed to his sword and delivered a couple quick strikes before returning the blade to its scabbard. Bear flinched and waited for the inevitable pain. Instead, his vest and clothes covering his upper body fell to the ground in shreds. Bear blinked and looked down to his body, seeing that he was completely unharmed, save for that he was now only wearing his pants. Sorry brat, I don't swing that way. He sneered as he managed to move and started to back away from Ulquiorra, sensing the chakra signatures of his comrades quickly approaching, no doubt detecting the danger the Anbu officer was in. You will serve as a message. Written by my hand with your blood as ink. Ulquiorra said as he blasted another wave of killer intent, freezing Bear once more. Before Bear could attempt to avoid Ulquiorra, the Espada stepped up to the largely built Anbu and raised his hand, aiming at the center of his chest. Huelga de los Huecos. Strike of the Hollow. Bear let out a scream of pain as Ulquiorra drove his extended hand into his chest, thrusting a hand that seemed to be made of the sharpest steel straight through him, without even the slightest bit of resistance. When Ulquiorra withdrew his hand, he looked at his handiwork. On Bear's chest was a hole, exactly like there was for him. Grimjaw commented that Ulquiorra wasn't aware of his actions in this manner, commenting that the fourth espada would inflict a wound that mimicked the size and location of his own hollow hole. Truth was, Ulquiorra was fully aware of it. He knew exactly the significance and the blow to his enemies. Grimjaw was right on one level, however, he did inflict the injury on those who caught his attention. In a way, it was Ulquiorra showing his enemies that he respected them by giving them the same injury and level of suffering as he had when he was alive. When he had done this to Kurosaki Ichigo, it was a sign of acknowledgement, a statement from the espada to the human that he saw him as his equal. In this instant, however, by attacking Bear with his Huelga de los Huecos, his strike of the hollow, he was not raising Bear to his level, but using him as an example. Konoha had executed a loyal ninja that resulted in this fatal wound. Ulquiorra recreated this, executing another loyal shinobi in the same manner. As Bear fell to the ground, Ulquiorra crouched down to the body of the Anbu. Using the blood still dripping from his hand, he traced his finger across the corpse's chest, writing a quick yet iconic message. This was a message to one person. And that person would recognize this and who sent it instantly. Once he was done, Ulquiorra hauled the body up and slung it over his shoulder, and just seconds before Bear's backup arrived, he vanished into thin air. Several hours later, Team Kakashi returned to Konoha, having left Suna shortly after the Kazukiage they had been sent to rescue came back on his own, claiming to have been rescued by the ambassador of Hueco Mundo, the white-clad man who called himself Ulquiorra Schiffer. When the team returned to Konoha to report to the council that they had in a way failed in their mission, when they noticed that the entire village was abuzz with activity. The gates had been closed and civilians confined to their homes, and the streets were filled with every shinobi available, from fresh graduates to hardened Anbu and even retired ninja. Haddock-san, welcome back. Kakashi turned around and saw the familiar appearance of Tsurutobi Asuma appearing in a cloud of smoke. Asuma, what's going on? There was an incident. At 1100 hours, an unknown element as well as Hyuga Hinata infiltrated the bunker. The smoking Jounin explained, motioning for Team Kakashi to follow as he turned and continued down the street. Hinata. I understood that she was a supporter of the betrayer, Uzumaki Naruto, but I wouldn't have thought she would go this far. Kakashi thought aloud. You said there was an unknown element. Asuma nodded. Yes. Reports claim that Hinata was last seen in the company of an individual most likely of similar age to Hyuga Hinata. The individual is reported to be thin, medium height, pale skin, black hair, green eyes and let me guess. He had a bone-white mask fragment on his head and was wearing all white. Kakashi asked. Asuma blinked in surprise. The mask fragment, yes, however he was a dark pair of pants and shirt with a white jacket. Do you know this individual? His name is Ulquiorra Schiffer. My team came across him in Suna. He claimed he was an ambassador for a place called Hueco Mundo. He is also the one who rescued the Kazukiage before my team was able to. So what happened to Suma-sensei? What did Hinata and this Ulquiorra do that has everyone running around like this? Sakura asked. They infiltrated the bunker and broke out the traitor cage and her apprentice. At this, every set of eyes in Team 7, minus the pale teen, Sai, widened. They broke out Tsunade and Shizune. I thought those two were in a hole so deep and guarded that not even Kami could break them out. Kakashi gasped. Well, it seems that those two did. And it gets worse. Asuma tossed away his cigarette and lit up a new one. How can it get worse than the one of the traitor Sanin and her apprentice at large? Bad enough that we haven't been able to find Orochimaru and that Jiraiya defected. But with all three Sanin at large. How could this possibly get worse? Kakashi asked. The Nara clan, Inyazuka clan, Aburam Shino and Rock Lee are missing and cannot be located within Konoha and the surrounding region. Asuma answered. At this point the council has decreed that they have committed treason and betrayed Konoha. What? 2 entire clans have just up and left. Sakura gasped. What about Kiba and Shikamaru? Every member of those clans are gone, including Shikamaru and Kiba. Asuma answered. Reports have been coming in that the 2 clans departed shortly before the bunker was breached, giving credit to the council's decree. What about the clan jutsu for the Nara and Inyazuka? Sasuke asked, his expression and tone in his voice showing his greed. He wanted those clan secrets. Has the council decided who gets the jutsu of the 2 clans? They did decide, yes. Asuma nodded. However, when a team of Danzu Sama's root shinobi were sent to gather the secrets of the Nara and Inyazuka clans, it was found that everything was already gone. It seems that the Nara and Inyazuka clan heads have been planning this for a while now, as they left nothing of value behind. Kakashi was about to ask if there was any progress when he felt Sasuke suddenly let out a large amount of killer intent. The Jounin turned and looked to his student to see that the young Uchiha was glaring at something in the distance to his left, down a surprisingly empty street. The one-eyed Jounin followed Sasuke's gaze, and he immediately pulled out a kunai, signaling Sakura, Sai and Asuma to follow his lead and look where the two Sharingan wielders were looking. And they saw Ulquiorra standing in the middle of the street. The four Konoha shinobi sped towards the pale-skinned man, closing the gap before they came to a stop several feet away from him. Ulquiorra Schiffer. Surrender now and your death will be swift. Kakashi ordered, holding his kunai out, pointing at the pale teen. Ulquiorra frowned and shook his head and ran a hand down the bloody Jounin vest he was wearing, before stuffing his hands into his pockets. I am under no obligation to follow your orders, had Kakashi. However, you can answer a question for me. Kakashi didn't say anything as Ulquiorra turned around and picked up something that was lying on the ground behind him. When a black-haired man stood back up, Kakashi and Asuma's eyes widened and Sakura swooned before vomiting. Sasuke's eyes widened only slightly. Sai didn't react. Tell me, where can I put this? I have no need for such cumbersome baggage. Ulquiorra was holding up the two halves of the Jounin known as Wolf. Kakashi heard Sakura slump to the ground and almost pass out as some internal organs fell from Wolf's torso. Ulquiorra, what have you done? Because of this you will be executed publicly and your corpse fed to the carrion. Ulquiorra shrugged and tossed the two halves of the body to Kakashi's feet. You will have to understand if I do not feel any sense of significance in a public execution in Konoha. From what I understand, it is a common occurrence. Your council seems to punish anyone they feel threatened by. The Espada turned his attention away from Kakashi and to Sasuke, looking at him with an unblinking gaze that seemed to bore into the Uchiha's soul. The reason I remain in Konoha is quite simple, in case you wish to know. I have a gift for Uchiha Sasuke. Sasuke raised an eyebrow and looked at Ulquiorra, curious about what the pale man was talking about. It is not the sort of gift that I can simply give you. Instead, I will give you directions. Ulquiorra pulled one of his hands out of his pockets and pointed to his right. At Training Ground 7. Go there and you will receive my gift to you. I have no real reason for it beyond that I feel that in light of the nostalgia and emotional journey I have enjoyed today it seems right. But that Ulquiorra looked at the four assembled Konoha ninja before nodding his head. Sarutobi Asuma, Hada Kakashi, Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke, small human, farewell. But that Ulquiorra turned around and vanished in a blur and the sound of static. Alright Kakashi, spill. Who was that and how does he know our names? Asuma looked over to Kakashi immediately after he determined that Ulquiorra was well and truly gone, something that troubled him as he had sensed no chakra used. Honestly Asuma, I have no idea. Kakashi answered as he looked over to Sasuke, who was beginning to make his way to Training Field 7. But first let's see what Ulquiorra Schiffer left Sasuke. A few minutes later Team Kakashi and Asuma jumped down into the middle of the designated training field. All four ninja immediately noticed the added feature to the area, spotting the distinct change that Ulquiorra had added. What is this? Sasuke asked, his eyes wide as he looked at what had been placed in the middle of the field. It was a Konoha Anbu officer, the Anbu's mask depicting a snarling bear. The body of the shinobi was bare to the waist, wearing only a pair of pants and shinobi sandals. But what caught not only the attention of Sasuke, but also Sakura, Kakashi and Asuma's attention, was a distinct hole in the middle of the corpse's chest. A fist-sized hole that went straight through Bear's body. And underneath the hole, written in blood, was one line. I expected more. Sasuke actually turned pale at this, recognizing the phrase. How could he not when those 3 words had cursed his every dream and idle thought since that day 3 years ago? I expected more. Kakashi frowned in confusion as he read what had been written on Bear's chest. What is that supposed to mean? Sasuke, does this mean anything to you? It is impossible. How could he know these things? The Uchiha ranted, stepping away from the body as if it repelled him. Yes Kakashi. That phrase does mean something to me. It's about Uzumaki. The traitor. How? Sakura asked. I never put this in my report, but when I executed him, Naruto said one thing. Sasuke explained. Just after I impaled him with my Chidori, in the exact spot as that Anbu's wound there, he spoke 3 words. Naruto flashed a grin at the Uchiha, one that held all the hatred and animosity he had felt about the whole ordeal, and shook his head. I expected more. Schiffer Dono, we have been expecting you, the Kazekage is waiting for you in his office. Ulquiorra nodded as he stepped past the 2 Chunin guards at Sunagakure and down the crevasse that led to the village proper. After leaving Konoha, satisfied that his message had been received, Ulquiorra had immediately made for Suna. Because of the several hours he had spent waiting for Team Kakashi and the time it had taken him to cross the distance between Konoha and Suna, Hinata and the others should have arrived by now. It sure seemed that at least someone had arrived, be it Hinata's party or the resistance or even both, since the Suna guards had been expecting his arrival. When Ulquiorra stepped out of the crevasse and into Suna proper, he turned his head to the side in time to see the jounin he had spoken to last time he had come here, Baki, arrive in a small whirlwind of sand. Shifer Dono, welcome back to Suna. The jounin Baki welcomed. We have been expecting you for some time now, refugees from Konoha have been coming on for the past few hours. From the looks of things 2 whole clans have fled Konoha. They have arrived then, good. Tell me, there was another party on its way here separate to the clans. Yes, Tsunade-sama and her party. They arrived moments before you. Kazukiage-sama clothed Swan-sama and Shizune-san and sent them to get something to eat and drink and have the seals on their bodies removed. Baki answered. You have our shinobi in quite a stir. Shifer Dono. Word has already spread from Konoha that the unknown element Ulquiorra Shifer broke into the most secure facility in the most powerful hidden village and spirited away 2 of their high-level prisoners. Ulquiorra nodded slowly as he listened, walking beside the Suna jounin as they made for the cage building. Is the presence of so many of Konoha's traders a threat to Suna's safety? I understand that Suna is an ally of Konoha, if only of self-preservation. Baki waved a hand dismissively. Don't worry, Kazukiage-sama has already formulated an official story should Konoha learn that the clans visited. The official story is that we were deceived by the Nara and Inuzuka clans to believe they were on official business. Gaara-sama is using his own status as an impressionable youth to explain his gullibility. How would you explain Swan and Shizune? 2 high-profile acknowledged criminals. Baki shrugged. Suna has a black market and underworld just like any other village. The criminals could have been smuggled into the village to be given time to recuperate. Ulquiorra nodded. Good, as soon as they are fit for travel we will be on our way. I do not believe that Tsunade nor any of the other former Konoha residents would want to put Suna at risk. Baki nodded. The consideration is appreciated. Shifer Dono. The 2 finally arrived to the Kazukiage main building and quickly made their way to Gaara's office. When Baki opened the door, the jounin leaped to the side, his eyes wide in fear as a hand shot out, missing Baki and grabbing Ulquiorra by the collar of his vest, pulling him into the office and slamming him against the wall next to the door. Ulquiorra blinked in mild surprise when he saw that the person holding him against the wall was none other than Hinata, displaying surprising strength as he was half a foot off the floor. He looked over to the side of the room to see Gaara seated at his desk with an amused expression on his face. How is this possible? The Espada brought his focus back to the woman holding him against the wall. He could hear the tears and emotion in the Hyuga's voice. You can't be him. He was killed right in front of me. Hinata said in almost a whisper, looking up to him and revealing her tear-stained face. Tell me you aren't him. My name is Ulquiorra Shifer. Hinata glared at Ulquiorra angrily before reaching out and unzipping the front of bloody vest the Arrancar was wearing, exposing his toned chest and the hole in the middle. You feel just like he did and you have a hole in your chest right where he did when he was killed. Now tell me who you are. Ulquiorra looked at her for a moment. Despite himself he felt a pang of guilt as he looked at her emotionally conflicted face. She felt both grief and hope. Hope that he was who she thought and grief for the reopening of old wounds. It was the same expression of confusion he had seen when he had kidnapped Orihime. The orange-haired woman had been given the opportunity to say goodbye to one person only. When he had arrived to take her to Hueco Mundo she had worn the same expression as Hinata was now. Hoping that she was doing the right thing to save the people she loved. And grief for leaving them. The part of Ulquiorra had hated that expression, it was an expression he couldn't stand. And to see it in Hinata's face. It was beyond his tolerance. What do you wish for me to say, Hinata? Ulquiorra asked, ignoring the stares from Gaara and Baki, who were staring with wide eyes at the hole that ran right through his chest. I want the truth. You lived in Naruto-kun's apartment. You claimed to have been hated as much as he was. You even claim that your appearance has changed in the 3 years since you were last in Konoha. Hinata shouted desperately. Now tell me who you are. Ulquiorra narrowed his eyes and let out a sigh before looking away. My name is Ulquiorra Shifer. But when I was alive, I was known as Uzumaki Naruto. The Espada grunted when he was suddenly let go and fell to the floor, his feet failing to catch him as Hinata stumbled back, her hands covering her mouth as she looked at him with wide eyes and in shock. Naruto-kun. Ulquiorra sighed and stood back up, shrugging off the vest and leaning against the wall, leaving his chest bare. I haven't gone by that name in what seems like 100 years. Pardon Ulquiorra, but 100 years. It's only been 3 since Naruto, since you died. Gaara spoke up finally, now curious. I do not understand it completely, but I believe that time passes differently in Hueco Mundo than it does in the land of the living. Hueco Mundo? That is an actual place? Baki asked as he stepped into the room, satisfied he wasn't in danger. When you first came here you claimed to be an ambassador from there. After you retrieved Gaara-sama I assumed it was a ruse to hide your true identity from Konoha. It is a real place. Ulquiorra nodded. When Uchiha Sasuke executed Uzumaki Naruto, executed me, I did truly die and pass on. The afterlife is split into 3 separate realms. The Soul Society, also known as Heaven, Hell and Hueco Mundo. Hueco Mundo, which translates to Hollow World, is a realm where all the lost and wronged spirits go. When someone dies, they usually pass between heaven or hell, depending on their actions in life. Ulquiorra continued. However, if the spirit of the departed is for some reason unable to move on or suffered a great emotional upheaval upon and shortly after their death, they undertake a transformation called hollowification and become hollows. What is a hollow? Gaara asked. A hollow is a spirit that has lost a part of itself. Its heart. Ulquiorra answered. The hole in my chest is also found in all other hollows. It is a physical representation of the emptiness within. So you're Naruto-kun soul. Hinata finally spoke up, looking at Ulquiorra tearfully. His hollow. Ulquiorra nodded. After I became a hollow, I abandoned my previous name and took on the identity of Ulquiorra Schiffer. You must understand, Hinata. I was abandoned and executed for the Uchiha's greed. I wish to start anew. But you came back to us. Why? Ulquiorra turned to look at Hinata and his expression softened and he managed a soft smile. Did you not pray for this? I apologize that I am not the child you declared your love for. But despite physical appearance alterations, personality changes and a changed identity. In a way, I am still Uzumaki Naruto. Hinata stepped back up to the pale-skinned Espada and pressed her hands flat against his chest and ran her fingers along the edges of the hole that ran through his chest. Naruto-kun. Hinata-chan, don't cry. Ulquiorra reached a hand up and wiped away a tear from her eyes. A constant for me, both as Naruto and Ulquiorra. I cannot abide women crying. It aches. Hinata looked up to Ulquiorra and into his eyes. A pair of bright green cat-like eyes that were so different from the warm comforting blue that had belonged to the boy she had fallen in love with. There. She saw it. The eyes did not change, but she saw something inside. Deep within the recesses of Ulquiorra's very soul. They say the eyes are the window to the soul. And what Hinata saw within Ulquiorra's soul brought all the feelings of love and adoration she had felt when Naruto had been alive. Naruto was alive, he was now Ulquiorra, a product of abandonment and betrayal, sentenced to a century of suffering as a heartless beard. Naruto-kun. Ulquiorra's eyes widened and he froze as the purple-haired woman wrapped him in a tight hug. Hinata's soft body radiated a warmth that Ulquiorra couldn't begin to compare to any other feeling he had ever felt. It was not uncomfortable, but it was certainly new for the Espada. As Uzumaki Naruto, he had been forced to question every gesture and touch, forced to determine if friendly behavior was a disguise for an attack. As a hollow, it was only more reinforced. In Hueco Mundo, hollows lived in solitude and were distrustful by nature, lest they drop their guard and be consumed. The closest Ulquiorra had come to this kind of contact was when Orihime had slapped him. And now he had the one Orihime had reminded him of hugging him, as if she were afraid he would disappear. I knew it, Hinata mumbled, her face smothered into Ulquiorra's neck. I knew you would come back. Somehow I just knew it. Ulquiorra carefully extracted himself from Hinata's arms and held her out at arm's length. There will be time for this later, Hinata-chan. For now, there is work to be done. Gaara nodded and stood up from his desk and stepped out from behind it. Yes, you do. The main question you face is what to do now that you have all left Konoha. Once they learn of Ulquiorra's true identity, they will hound him relentlessly, as well as the Akatsuki for the Kyuubi. Gaara paused for a moment before looking to the Espada. Speaking of which, what is the status on the demon? Due to your death and rebirth, is the Kyuubi still sealed within you? Ulquiorra shook his head. I no longer contain the Kyuubi. It would be logical to assume it has been reborn. As for Konoha learning of our connected past, it is not immediately evident, but they will learn in due time. Uchiha Sasuke is closest. I left him a message in the form of my recreated execution with my last words to him. He will be unable to conceive that I still live, so will assume that I possess some other connection to Uzumaki Naruto. Gaara nodded. Very well then. So what do you plan on doing, Ulquiorra? Like it or not, your movements are limited. 2 powerful clans formerly of Konoha, several of which will be soon listed as missing ninja, the Aburam clan heir, Hyuga clan heir, your Taijutsu specialist, Rock Lee, and the former Hokage who has been listed as a S-ranked criminal. Ulquiorra nodded and looked over to Hinata. What would you suggest, Hinata-chan? I have lost touch with the shinobi world. I cannot make a proper decision. How about a hidden village? Ulquiorra turned around to the new voice and saw out of the corner of his eye Baki diving for cover. The next thing he saw was the manicured fist of Tsunade flying towards his face. The Espada's head moved only slightly from the force of the blow. Tsunade glared at Ulquiorra, ignoring the throbbing pain in her hand as she planned for more pain to unleash on the pale-skinned teen, despite that it felt like she had just punched the Hokage monument. You have a lot of explaining to do, Naruto. The woman glared at Ulquiorra. The Espada ignored the minor throbbing through his face as he looked at the former cage. Perhaps I am not the only one, Tsunade. I would very much like to learn of why you sentenced me yet claim that you were not in control. The female cage sucked in a breath before lowering her head in shame. I will, I promise. Forgive my interruption, Tsunade-sama, but you mentioned a solution. Gaara interrupted, knowing that the time for heart-to-heart talks was for another time. Tsunade nodded, grateful for the distraction. Yes. We do the same thing my old teammate Orochimaru did. By forming a Tagakur no Sato in the land of rice, he took himself out of the jurisdiction of the hunter department. Konoha cannot pursue us as missing ninja if we are tied to a hidden village. So we do what Orochimaru did. We found our own. Ulquiorra raised an eyebrow. I do not imagine such a thing is as simple as one would believe. I imagine that it took Orochimaru considerable time. Tsunade nodded. That's why we could do this somewhere where a hidden village previously existed. Gaara picked up a folder from his desk and handed it to Ulquiorra. Shortly after your death, before Tsunade-sama was overthrown, she approached me with plans to rediscover the ruins of one of the great hidden villages. Ulquiorra opened the folder and skimmed through it. These reports are more than 10 years old. How sure are you that this site is still accessible and in existence? I know for a fact that the ruin of this village are still around today. The architects who designed and built the village were renowned for their durability. They may be ruins now, but they will still remain for years without further decay. Sounds like you have some connection to this village, Tsunade-sama. Hinata spoke up. Tsunade nodded. Indirectly. The connection to this village is actually to Naruto, or Ulquiorra, whatever you call yourself today. She glanced at the Arrancar. His mother, Uzumaki Kushina, used to live there. The village was called Yuzugakure no Sato. Mother? My mother's name was Uzumaki Kushina. Ulquiorra spoke up, looking interested. Yeah, she was also the Kyuubi's previous container prior to the demon being sealed in Naruto. Tsunade revealed. Ulquiorra chose not to correct her on his name as he motioned for the former cage to continue. I did not know this. Your mother was a refugee from Yuzugakure shortly after the village was destroyed by a natural disaster and the Uzumaki clan all but wiped out. Tsunade continued. It was my intention after you were executed to find the ruins of Yuzugakure and have it rebuilt in your memory. Ulquiorra nodded slowly as he read through the file that Gaara had given him. According to the file, his mother, Uzumaki Kushina, had been a part of the Uzumaki clan, one of the most powerful clans in the elemental nations, renowned for their longevity and healing capabilities. Also, according to the file, when the Shodai of Konoha, Senju Harashima, gave the 9 Biju to the other nations as a sign of friendship, he gave the Kyuubi to Yuzugakure, which was sealed within a member of the Uzumaki family, and them passed down periodically. He, Uzumaki Naruto, had been the 3rd Uzumaki to become a vessel for the Kyuubi. If you had this planned before you were overthrown, wouldn't it stand to reason that Konoha knows that this will be a likely move? Tsunade shook her head. No, I don't think so. The only one I shared this with was Jiraiya and Shizune, and all documentation linking Yuzugakure to the Uzumakis was given to Gaara-kun for safekeeping. I see. And where is Jiraiya? Ulquiorra asked, mildly curious of the fate of the old tutor to Uzumaki Naruto. After you were executed, Jiraiya defected from Konoha. He became a missing ninja, and last I heard he was working within the Akatsuki. Tsunade answered. Jiraiya Dono works for the Akatsuki. You mean he was part of the group that tried to kill me? Gaara asked, looking a mixture of angry and shocked. Yes and no. Jiraiya is counted as a member of the Akatsuki, but he doesn't take place in the hunting of the Jinchuuriki. Last time I heard from him, the Akatsuki leader was assigning him to build on his spy network. We are distancing ourselves from the matter at hand. Ulquiorra spoke up, bringing attention back to him. When I left Konoha, the entire village was being searched. It is only a matter of time until they expand their search outside their own walls and in this direction. Tsunade nodded. Alright. We need to go to the Land of Waves. It's neutral territory in the shinobi world and is within Yuzugakure's territory. But if you are suggesting that Yuzugakure is located in that region, it would fall within the recently expanded territory of Kurigakure. Gaara pointed out, pulling out a map of the elemental nations. Last year Kurigakure fell under new leadership of Agade Mizukage. Since then Kiri has solidified its chaotic borders. Tsunade swore. This could cause a problem. Kiri may be one of the weaker of the 5 great nations, but they still possess more power than we can bring to bear to forcibly take Yuzugakure. Is it not possible to strike a deal with the Mizukage? Would not Kurigakure relish the return of Yuzugakure as an ally? Ulquiorra asked. It could be. But we would have to prove to them that we possess something that would risk opening their borders. Hinata voiced, starting to inch towards Ulquiorra. Ulquiorra nodded and pulled out a scroll from his pocket. Konoha is not very popular if my understanding is correct. Kurigakure can stand to gain far more by allowing the revival of this village than any other result. With Yuzugakure and Kiri in a stable alliance, Suna can afford to sever the already strained ties with Konoha. But this, Kiri stands to gain an alliance with not only Yuzu, but Suna potentially as well. Gaara nodded in thought. It would certainly prove to be tempting for the Mizukage. However, with the disappearance of the rest of the Uzumaki clan from Konoha, that being you, Konoha has been able to table negotiations of a treaty and alliance with Iwagakure. Even with the significant losses I was suffered in the Third War, they still boast a large military force. Ulquiorra nodded and unsealed his Espada uniform and Sasori's Akatsuki cloak and ring. He picked up the Akatsuki cloak and ring and handed them to Tsunade. Wear these. If Konoha ever discovers you, it will assist to distance you from any established village and association. Tsunade took the cloak and looked at it before looking at the teen. Who did this belong to? Akasuna no Sasori. Tsunade's eyes widened and she looked at the cloak with an expression of awe, like all high-ranking shinobi knew of S-ranked criminals like Sasori. The man was a legend and pioneer of puppetry and poisons. For Naruto, Ulquiorra to have taken such a powerful ninja out on his own. It was incredible. You should put it on Tsunade, we have work to be done. Ulquiorra said, snapping her out of her thoughts. The Sannin looked up to the Espada and blinked in surprise when she saw him wearing the white outfit he had unsealed. With the new attire in place, it gave Ulquiorra quite an intimidating appearance. Currently the Espada was zipping up the front of his jacket to cover his hole. Gather the two clans that made the exodus with you and other defected ninja and make for the land of waves. The sooner you leave Suna behind, the easier it will be for Gaara to handle any political concerns when Konoha inevitably searches here. Ulquiorra ordered. Gaara, if at all possible, send word to the land of spring. The daimyo owes a favor to me as Uzumaki Naruto. She can be willing to arrange for supplies and reconstruction. What do I tell the others about you, Naruto? Swan asked. Kiba and the others will want to know who you are. They should know that you are still alive. Ulquiorra shook his head. No. Not until the truth concerning my death comes to light, I will not reveal myself any more than required. Tsunade nodded sadly. I will explain everything soon. I promise. What about you, Ulquiorra-kun? Hinata asked, now standing right next to the Espada to his own surprise. The way you speak, you won't be coming with us, will you? No, I will speak to the Mizukage. I can cross the distance far faster than any human. Ulquiorra answered. I will attempt to obtain the land rights to Uzumaki. Alright then, but Naruto. Tsunade reached out and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Please try and resolve it peacefully. I understand. He nodded absent-mindedly, his focus elsewhere. Ulquiorra's attention was focused on a different issue. Towards the end of the conversation, Ulquiorra had been running an assessment on his powers. His seal was still removed, so he had access to all of his Reiatsu and power, so he was taking the opportunity to attempt to gauge his power level and just how limited he really was. After a few seconds, Ulquiorra nodded to himself and turned to the three occupants of the room, Gaara, Tsunade and Hinata. Baki had long since left to attend to other duties. Please step back, I am going to attempt something I have not tried since my revival. He commanded. The three retreated over to Gaara's desk, leaving the majority of the Kazukiyage's office empty for the Espada. With the space open for him, Ulquiorra focused on his hollow powers and reached into the power within him. After a brief second, far longer than it would have normally taken but done so for safety reasons, Ulquiorra withdrew his right hand from his pocket and clicked his fingers into the air. 3 sets of eyes widened, a common occurrence around Ulquiorra it seemed, as reality itself distorted like a heatwave before splitting open like a vicious wound. The hole in reality widened till it was large enough for someone to walk through before stabilizing. Inside the tear was nothing more than a chaos of darkness and light. What the hell is that? Tsunade asked, feeling a sudden and overwhelming creeping chill running down her spine as she looked at it. Garganta. Ulquiorra stated as he flicked his eyes back to look at the former cage, still half facing the void. It means throat. This is the means that I used to be able to travel to and from Hueco Mundo. The void you see, it is the space within spaces. By opening a garganta, I am opening a gateway to the void that exists between the world of the living and the spiritual world. Ulquiorra explained. You humans would consider now what you see as purgatory. Gaara gaped at this and he stepped closer to the void and looked at it with wonder. This is what I glimpsed when the Akatsuki were extracting the Ichibi. But what relevance is this? Do you intend to return to Hueco Mundo? Ulquiorra shook his head. I am unable to return there in this state. Hueco Mundo, the Soul Society, they are both places for spiritual entities and as such only a spirit can enter them. I am now flesh and bones. I am unable to cross through a garganta connected to Hueco Mundo. Then this garganta of yours. It is connected to another location on this world then. Hinata voiced, showing reasonable insight. Ulquiorra nodded. Correct. It is interesting though, I must admit. I have noticed, just with this instant, that my powers have been noticeably diminished. I simply assumed that this was a side effect of transferring from a being of spiritual presence to a physical one. You're saying you are weaker here than you were in Hueco Mundo? Tsunade asked. Ulquiorra nodded. That is correct. If I have guessed accurately, I would say my power is currently at 80% capacity. Do you believe you will ever return to full power? Gaara asked as Ulquiorra stepped up to the void. I cannot say. It will require further examination. But I do not believe so. Ulquiorra said as he stepped into the void. Wait, Ulquiorra-kun, I want to come with you. Hinata said, stepping up to enter the void. She was about to enter the Garganta when she was stopped by Ulquiorra's hand. You cannot enter this void, Hinata. You do not possess the spiritual aura to survive in this environment. If you were to ever enter here you would fall through this endless void and suffer as all the other lost souls within have. Hinata made a sad face before nodding, understanding what was said. Go with Tsunade and I will meet you in the land of waves. Hinata nodded sadly and watched as Ulquiorra gave her a small smile before the Garganta closed. What if Naruto reincarnation of Ulquiorra and Bleach? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.